Dawson Kincaid never thought mercy would make him a wanted man. One frozen Wyoming night in 1872, a dying Apache woman collapsed in his barn with a newborn son, the widow of the war chief whose raids killed his wife. Every instinct screamed to turn them away. Instead, he pulled them inside. That single choice cost him everything: his land, his name, his freedom. Now, with soldiers closing in and a blizzard raging, Dawson faces an impossible decision: let them hang for surviving, or become the outlaw who saves them. Some debts can only be paid in blood and snow. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Dawson and Talisa's story travels. Now settle in, because this is a tale of enemies who became family, and the brutal winter that tested whether love could survive when everything else burned to ash. The wind came down from the Medicine Bow Mountains like a living thing, hungry and cruel, stripping heat from anything foolish enough to stand against it. Dawson Kincaid stood anyway, one boot braced on the bottom rail of his fence, watching the sky turn the color of old bruises. Snow was coming, the kind that buried fence lines and suffocated cattle where they stood, the kind that made men philosophical about death. He'd been philosophical about death for 3 years now. His ranch sprawled across a valley that most folks considered too remote to be worth claiming, which was exactly why Dawson had claimed it. 200 acres of stubborn grass, a creek that froze solid 4 months a year, and a house built from logs he'd cut himself when his hands still knew how to build instead of destroy. The barn loomed dark against the dying light, its roof sagging on the north corner where he hadn't bothered to repair it after last winter. What was the point? The horses were gone. The hands were gone. His wife was gone. Margaret had died in the spring of '69, caught in an Apache raid on a supply train she'd insisted on accompanying because she wanted new curtains for the parlor. Dawson had been off trailing stolen cattle when it happened. He'd come home to find her body already buried and a letter from the territorial marshal explaining that 7 settlers had been killed, 16 wounded, and the raiders had vanished into the mountains like smoke. The marshal offered his condolences and suggested Dawson might want to relocate to a more populated area. Dawson had written back 2 words: go to hell. He'd lived alone ever since, speaking only to his ghosts and the occasional supply merchant who braved the 12-mile ride from Ten Sleep. The ranch hands had drifted off one by one, spooked by his silence and the way he'd stand on the porch at night with a rifle, watching the dark ridgeline like he was waiting for something to emerge. Maybe he was. Margaret's death had carved something cold and patient into the center of his chest, something that knew how to wait. The first snowflakes began to fall as he walked back toward the house, each one fat and lazy, drifting down like they had all the time in the world. By morning, those lazy flakes would be a whiteout that could kill a man in 20 minutes. Dawson had learned to read Wyoming weather the way some men read scripture, and tonight's scripture promised violence. He was reaching for the porch rail when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not the wind, not an animal. Something deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Metal on wood, coming from the side gate that led to the barn. Dawson's hand went to the pistol at his hip, a Colt Army that had seen more use than he cared to remember. He moved along the porch, boots silent on snow-dusted boards, keeping his body angled so the lamplight from the window wouldn't silhouette him. 3 years of solitude hadn't made him careless. If anything, it had made him more careful. Paranoid, Margaret would have called it, back when she still had a voice. Tap, tap, tap. Whoever was out there didn't have the sense God gave a fence post, knocking in the middle of a blizzard instead of riding straight up to the house like a civilized person. Dawson's finger curled around the trigger as he rounded the corner. What he saw stopped him cold. A child stood at the gate, one small fist still raised to knock again. She couldn't have been more than 7, maybe 8, dressed in layers of mismatched cloth that might have been a dress once but now looked like rags held together by hope and stubbornness. Her face was the color of old pennies, framed by black hair that hung in matted tangles past her shoulders. Ice crystals clung to her eyelashes. Her lips had gone the color of slate. She looked up at Dawson with eyes that had already seen too much, and whispered, "Sir, she's too weak to beg." Then her knees buckled. Dawson caught her before she hit the ground, his body moving before his brain could object. She weighed nothing, less than nothing, He could feel every bone through the soaked fabric, feel the violent shivering that meant her body was still fighting the cold but wouldn't be fighting much longer. Where? The word came out harsh. He hadn't used his voice in days. The girl's arm lifted, one finger pointing toward the barn. Dawson hooked the child against his chest with one arm and covered the distance in long strides, snow already beginning to accumulate on his shoulders. The barn door hung open. He always left it open in winter so the wind wouldn't rip it off the hinges, and the darkness inside seemed to breathe. Hello? His voice echoed off the rafters. For a moment, nothing. Then a sound that lifted every hair on the back of his neck. A baby crying. Not the healthy wail of an infant demanding attention, but a thin, reedy sound that spoke of cold and hunger and the edge of something worse. Dawson stepped into the barn, his eyes adjusting to the gloom, and found her. She lay in the empty horse stall at the far end, half buried in old straw that Dawson hadn't bothered to clear out. A woman, her body curled around something bundled against her chest. Dark hair spilled across her face. Her dress, if you could call it that, was more blood than fabric, and the blood was fresh enough that it gleamed black in the dim light. The baby screamed again, a sound that could crack a man's heart if he still had one to crack. Dawson set the girl down carefully. Stay here. He approached the woman the way he'd approach a wounded animal, ready for her to bolt or attack or die right there in his barn. Her breathing came in shallow gasps that fogged the frozen air. As he knelt beside her, she lifted her head. Their eyes met. For a moment that stretched into eternity, Dawson forgot how to breathe. Her face was gaunt with fever and exhaustion, but the bone structure underneath was unmistakable. High cheekbones, broad forehead, copper skin pulled tight over features that spoke of lineage and pride, and something that had been beaten down but not broken. And there, on her left wrist as she shifted the bundle in her arms, a mark that made Dawson's blood turn to ice water. 3 chevron lines. Tribal tattoo. Apache. The bundle moved and a tiny fist emerged from the wrapping, fingers no bigger than corn kernels grasping at nothing. The baby's cry had weakened to a whimper. The woman tried to lift him higher, tried to bring him to her breast, but her arms had no strength left. Please. Her voice was barely a whisper, shaped by an accent that turned the English word into something foreign. He needs... She didn't finish. Her eyes rolled back and her body went slack. Dawson caught the baby before he hit the ground. The infant was a boy, naked except for a strip of cloth someone had tied around his umbilical cord. His skin had a bluish tint that meant hypothermia was already setting in. His mother's blood covered him, sticky and still warm. He was maybe hours old, maybe less. Dawson stood there in his barn, holding a dying Apache baby in his arms, while an Apache woman bled out in his straw and an Apache child shivered by the door, and every instinct he possessed screamed at him to walk away. These people had killed Margaret. Maybe not these exact people, but their people, their tribe. Their warriors had put an arrow through his wife's throat and left her to die in the dirt like an animal. For 3 years, Dawson had nursed his hatred like a garden, watering it with whiskey and loneliness until it grew thick enough to crowd out everything else. He looked down at the baby in his hands. The boy's eyes were open now, dark and unfocused, already starting to glaze. Dawson made a sound that might have been a curse or a prayer, he wasn't sure which, and started moving. You, he barked at the girl by the door. Can you walk? She nodded, though her whole body trembled. Then walk, to the house, now. He scooped up the woman. She weighed more than her daughter, but not by much, and carried her across the yard in long, angry strides. The baby he tucked inside his coat, against his chest where his body heat might buy them another few minutes. Snow fell harder now, big flakes that stuck to his hat brim and turned his vision white. The house was cold. He'd let the fire die down to coals because what was the point of heat when you were the only one home? Now he kicked the door open and shouted orders at the girl like she was a ranch hand instead of a half-frozen child. Stoke that fire! All the wood in the box, you hear me? Get it hot! While she scrambled to obey, Dawson carried the woman through to the back room, the old bunk room where he'd planned to house ranch hands back when he still believed in things like plans and futures. It was barely bigger than a closet, with a narrow cot and a potbelly stove that hadn't been lit in months. He laid her on the cot and started working. First the stove. He had kindling stashed in a bucket, and his hands remembered how to build a fire even though his mind was elsewhere. Newspaper, kindling, then split logs arranged in a pyramid. The match flared and caught, and within minutes, heat began to spread through the small room. Next, the baby. Dawson pulled him from inside his coat and examined him in the growing firelight. The boy was still breathing, barely, but his skin had gone from blue to gray. Dawson grabbed a wool blanket from the shelf and wrapped him tight, then laid him in a wooden crate by the stove where the heat would hit him first. Then he turned to the mother, to the what? She looked worse in the firelight. The blood wasn't just on her dress, it was everywhere, soaked into the cot, dripping onto the floor. Childbirth blood, he realized. She'd given birth in his barn, alone, in a blizzard. Jesus Christ, Dawson muttered, and started stripping away the ruined fabric. He'd dealt with wounded men before. During the war, the big one, when he wore Union blue, he'd pulled enough bullets and tied enough tourniquets to know his way around human anatomy. But this was different. This was a woman's body, intimate and vulnerable in ways that made his hands clumsy. He forced himself to focus on the work, found the source of the bleeding, tearing that happened during birth, nothing he could stitch, but nothing that would kill her if he could stop the hemorrhaging. He packed the wound with clean cloth torn from his own shirts, then covered her with every blanket he owned. By the time he finished, sweat ran down his spine despite the cold. The girl appeared in the doorway, her eyes huge in her thin face. Is she? The child couldn't finish the question. Not yet, Dawson said. It was the closest he could come to reassurance. What's her name? Talisa. And yours? Mira. Well, Mira, your mama and your brother need food and water and heat in that order. You know how to heat water? She nodded. Then heat it. There's a pot hanging by the fireplace. Fill it from the pump outside. Pump handle's probably frozen. You'll need to prime it with hot water from the kettle first. Can you do that? Another nod. Good. Once it's hot, bring it here. We need to clean your brother or he'll get infection on top of everything else. Mira disappeared. Dawson heard her moving around the main room, heard the clank of the pot and the scrape of the fire poker. Good. The girl had sense. She'd need it to survive whatever came next. He turned back to Talisa. In the firelight, with her face clean of dirt and blood, she looked younger than he'd first thought. Mid-20s, maybe. About the age Margaret had been when they married. Her breathing had steadied, still shallow, but regular now, the fever flush fading from her cheeks. She would probably live. Dawson wasn't sure how he felt about that. He pulled up a crate and sat down heavily, exhaustion hitting him like a fist now that the immediate crisis had passed. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire crackled. The baby made small sounds in his makeshift cradle, alive but fragile. Dawson looked at his hands. They were covered in blood. Apache blood soaked into his skin, under his nails, drying in the creases of his palms. 3 years ago, he would have rejoiced at the sight. Now, it just made him tired. Chet. The baby's name was Rafe. Dawson didn't learn this until the next morning, when Talisa woke briefly and whispered it to Mira before falling back into fevered sleep. It was a strange name for an Apache child, half Spanish, half something else. But then again, nothing about this situation made sense. They settled into a routine born of necessity. Mira proved herself capable beyond her years, tending the fire, heating water, even figuring out how to mash up beans into something soft enough for her mother to swallow. Dawson handled everything else, changing the bandages, keeping Talisa's fever down with cold compresses, and feeding Rafe. That last part nearly broke him. The boy couldn't nurse. His mother was too weak. Her milk dried up from dehydration and trauma. Dawson had to improvise. He found a rubber nipple in his supplies, left over from bottle-feeding orphaned calves, and rigged it to a mason jar filled with sugar water. Later, when Mira managed to coax a neighbor's goat into the yard, where the hell she'd found a goat in a blizzard, Dawson never asked. They switched to goat's milk. Rafe drank. Slowly at first, then with more vigor. Color returned to his skin, that terrible blue-gray fading to healthy bronze. He started crying properly, loud and demanding, which Dawson took as a good sign, even though the sound made him want to ride into the nearest town and leave the baby on the church steps. He didn't, of course, but he thought about it. On the third day, Talisa opened her eyes and stayed awake. Dawson was changing her bandages when it happened. One moment she was unconscious, the next she was staring at him with eyes so dark they looked black in the lamplight. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched him work with an intensity that made his hands clumsy. "You need to drink," he said finally, reaching for the cup of water on the bedside crate. She let him lift her head, let him tip the cup to her lips. She drank slowly, her throat working with effort. When she'd finished, he laid her back down and moved to check on Rafe. "Why?" Her voice was rough from disuse. Dawson didn't turn around. "Why what? Why help us?" It was a fair question. He'd been asking himself the same thing for 3 days. "Because," he said, lifting Rafe from his crate and checking his swaddling, "I'm an idiot." Behind him, Talisa made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. Over the next week, she grew stronger, strong enough to sit up, strong enough to nurse Rafe, her body finally producing milk now that she wasn't dying, strong enough to watch Dawson with those unreadable eyes every time he entered the room. Mira had taken to sleeping on the floor beside her mother's cot, curled up like a dog. During the day, she shadowed Dawson around the ranch, helping with chores that a child her size shouldn't be able to do but somehow managed. She had her mother's stubbornness, he noticed, and her silence. The girl spoke only when necessary, as if words were a limited resource that couldn't be wasted. It was Mira who finally broke the tension. They were in the barn. Dawson was repairing a broken harness while Mira swept out the stall where they'd first found Talisa, when the girl stopped and looked at him. "You were a soldier," she said. Not a question, a statement. Dawson kept his eyes on the leather. "Long time ago." "Mama says she knows you." His hand stilled. "She said that?" "She says you let them live." Mira's voice was matter-of-fact, like she was discussing the weather. "When the other soldiers wanted to kill them, the women and children, you said no." Dawson's memory lurched back. 10 years ago, Arizona Territory, a raid on a Apache camp that intelligence had claimed was housing warriors. They'd ridden in at dawn and found mostly women, children, and old men. The warriors were gone, off on a raid of their own. His commanding officer had given the order to fire anyway. Dawson had countermanded it. He'd been a lieutenant then, young and still stupid enough to believe in things like rules of engagement. The argument that followed had ended with Dawson being stripped of his rank and transferred to a different unit. He'd resigned his commission a month later. He'd never forgotten the faces of those women, though, the way they'd looked at him as his men lowered their rifles. Not gratitude. Something harder, something that said, "You did the bare minimum. Don't expect us to be grateful." "I remember," he said quietly. Mira nodded, as if this confirmed something. Then she went back to sweeping. That night, after Mira had fallen asleep and Rafe had been fed and settled, Dawson went back to check on Talisa. She was awake, sitting up against the wall with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. In the firelight, she looked less like a dying woman and more like what she probably was, a survivor. She spoke first. "You remember the camp?" "I remember." "You were younger, your face." She gestured vaguely. "No lines, no—" She touched her own cheek, miming scars. Dawson had plenty of scars now, some from the war, some from the years after, all of them written on his face like a map of bad decisions. "You remember me?" he asked. "I remember the soldier who broke the chain of command, who argued with his superior until his voice broke." She tilted her head. "I remember thinking you were foolish, that you would be punished for showing mercy." "I was. And yet you did it again, here, with us." Dawson leaned against the doorframe. Outside, the blizzard had finally broken, leaving behind a silence so profound it seemed to ring. "Wouldn't call it mercy, more like temporary insanity." "There is a word in my language," Talisa said. "Go-ka." It means to choose compassion when hate would be easier, to choose life when death would be simpler. Her eyes met his. "What you did was go-ka. For us, even when you hate us." "I don't hate you." "You hate what we represent." She said it without accusation, just fact. The soldiers who killed your wife wore different uniforms, but they were my people. I can see it in your face, the way you look at me when you think I'm asleep." Dawson had nothing to say to that. It was true. Talisa shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at her healing wounds. "My husband was a war chief, Nietzsche's brother. He led many raids against white settlements." She paused. "Your wife might have died by his hand. I do not know. He died 3 years ago, shot by cavalry near Fort Apache. I became unwanted, a widow with a child, a burden." "That why you ran?" "I ran because staying meant death. For me, for Mira. The new chief did not want reminders of the old ways. When I became pregnant with Rafe," she touched her stomach where new life had grown. "He said the baby was bad luck, that I had lain with spirits. He would have killed us all." "So you ran into a Wyoming winter with a baby about to be born and a 7-year-old girl." "I ran to the only place I remembered mercy." She looked at him steadily. "I remembered your face, your ranch, because we scouted it once, before the raid. I thought, if he showed mercy once, perhaps he will again." Dawson felt something crack inside his chest. Not breaking, more like thawing. "You're a damn fool," he said. "Yes," she almost smiled, "but I'm alive, and so is my son, because you are also a damn fool." They looked at each other across the small room, two people who should have been enemies, bound together by nothing more substantial than a moment of weakness on a frozen night. "You can stay," Dawson heard himself say, "until you're strong enough to travel. Until spring, maybe. Then you'll need to move on." "Where?" "Don't know. Not my problem." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. These people were his problem now. He'd made them his problem the moment he'd carried Talisa out of that barn. Talisa nodded slowly, like she could hear the lie too. "Thank you, Dawson Kincaid." He left before she could say anything else that might crack him open further. But the days fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal if you didn't think too hard about it. Dawson worked the ranch, what little of it needed working in winter, while Mira helped in ways that made him uncomfortable because she was so damn competent. The girl could chop wood, haul water, and manage livestock with a skill that spoke of too much practice at too young an age. Talisa grew stronger. By the end of the second week, she could walk from the bunk room to the main house without needing to rest. By the third week, she was cooking meals, refusing to let Dawson subsist on hardtack and jerky while she was under his roof. She sang to Rafe in Apache, low lullabies that drifted through the house like smoke. Dawson pretended not to listen, but he learned the melodies despite himself. They didn't talk much. The silence between them was comfortable in ways that surprised him. It had been so long since he'd shared space with another adult that he'd forgotten how to do it. But Talisa didn't demand conversation. She moved through his house like a ghost, present but unobtrusive, there when needed and invisible when not, except for her eyes. Those were always present, always watching. One morning, Dawson came in from checking the fences to find her standing in front of the fireplace, looking at the photograph on the mantel. Margaret, frozen forever in sepia tones, her hand resting on Dawson's shoulder as they posed for the photographer in Denver. They'd looked so young, so stupidly hopeful. "Your wife," Talisa said without turning around. "Yeah." She was beautiful. She was. Talisa reached out but didn't touch the frame. "I understand now why you hate, why you—" She trailed off. "My husband was also beautiful. Also dead. Also taken by violence that made no sense." Dawson stood in the doorway, snow melting off his boots. "How'd it happen?" "Cavalry ambush. They said he fought well, that he killed 3 soldiers before they shot him." She lowered her hand. "I do not know if that is true. I hope it is not. I hope he died quickly, without time to be afraid. Soldiers always say that. Doesn't make it true." "I know." She turned to face him. "But I choose to believe it anyway, because the alternative is thinking he suffered, that he called for me, and I was not there." Something in her voice made Dawson's throat tight. He'd had the same thoughts about Margaret, wondered if she'd called his name as the arrow struck, if she'd been afraid, if she'd died hating him for not being there to protect her. "I'm sorry," he said. The words felt rusty. He hadn't apologized for anything in 3 years. Talisa tilted her head. For my husband's death, or for your wife's? Both, neither, I don't know. That is honest, at least. She moved past him toward the kitchen. There is coffee. You should drink it before it gets cold. It was the closest they'd come to talking about the weight they both carried. 2 days later, everything changed. Dawson rode into 10 Sleep for supplies, flour, sugar, ammunition, the basics. He left early in the morning, telling Talisa he'd be back by nightfall. It was a clear day, the first real warmth since the blizzard, and the ride felt good, almost peaceful. The town was its usual collection of weathered buildings and suspicious looks. Dawson kept his head down, made his purchases, and was loading the wagon when he saw it. The poster was tacked to the front of the general store, fresh ink still dark on cheap paper. Wanted for questioning, escaped Indian woman Apache. Traveling with 2 children. Considered dangerous. Reward for information leading to capture. Below the text was a crude sketch that could have been any Apache woman, but was close enough to Talisa that Dawson's blood turned cold. He tore the poster down, crumpled it, and shoved it in his pocket. They put that up yesterday, the store owner said from the doorway. Army came through, asking questions. Said she escaped from custody during childbirth. Killed a guard. That's so. Dawson kept his voice flat. Yep. Said she's dangerous, crazy, that she'd slit your throat soon as look at you. The man spat tobacco juice into the street. Said there's more posters going up in every town within 100 miles. They want her bad. Dawson climbed onto the wagon seat. Army always wants something. He drove out of town at a pace that wouldn't draw attention, but the moment he hit the tree line, he whipped the horses into a gallop. The sun was setting when he pulled into his yard. The house looked peaceful, smoke rising from the chimney, lamplight glowing in the windows. For a moment he let himself pretend everything was fine. Then he opened the door and saw Talisa's face. She knew. Somehow, she knew. How long? She asked. Dawson pulled out the crumpled poster and smoothed it on the table. They put it up yesterday, probably hitting every town within riding distance. Talisa stared at the paper, her face unreadable. Mira stood behind her, Rafe in her arms, eyes wide. They will come here, Talisa said. Eventually. Yeah. We should leave. And go where? It's winter. You're still weak. Rafe's barely a month old. Dawson leaned against the table. You wouldn't make it 10 miles. Then we put you in danger by staying. I'm already in danger. Helping you, hiding you, that's aiding and abetting as far as the Army's concerned. If they connect you to this ranch, I'm as good as hanged. Talisa's jaw tightened. Then you should turn us in. The words hung in the air like smoke. Dawson looked at her. This woman who'd stumbled into his life on the worst night of winter. This enemy who'd somehow become something else, and felt that crack in his chest split wider. No, he said. Dawson, no. He straightened. You're not leaving. Not yet. Not until you're strong enough to survive. And I'm not turning you in to be hanged for the crime of not dying when they wanted you to. They will kill you. Maybe. Wouldn't be the first time someone tried. Talisa shook her head. You do not understand. The Army, they do not forgive. I understand plenty. Dawson's voice was harder now. I understand that you trusted me enough to come here. That your daughter's still alive because I didn't turn you away. That your son's breathing because I fed him goat's milk at 3 in the goddamn morning. He paused. And I understand that if you leave now, you'll die. All of you. And I'll have to live with that. Silence fell. Even Rafe had stopped fussing. Finally, Talisa spoke. Why? It was the same question she'd asked weeks ago, but this time Dawson had a different answer. Because, he said quietly, I'm tired of death. Tired of burying people. Tired of... He gestured helplessly. Whatever this is, whatever you and your kids are, it's the first time in 3 years I've felt like something other than a ghost. And I'll be damned if I let the Army take that away. Talisa looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. We will stay, she said. For now. Good. But as Dawson turned away to stoke the fire, he saw the truth written on her face. She was already planning their escape. The question was whether he'd try to stop her or help her. The next morning arrived with the kind of clarity that made lies impossible. Sunlight cut through the frost on the windows, turning the world outside into something bright and brittle. Dawson stood at the kitchen window, coffee cooling in his hand, watching Mira carry firewood across the yard with the determined gait of someone twice her age. The girl never complained, never asked for anything. She just worked, her breath fogging in the cold air, her thin arms straining under logs that should have been too heavy for her. Behind him, he heard Talisa moving around, the soft sounds of her preparing breakfast, cornmeal mush, because that's what they had, and the quiet humming of an Apache lullaby that had become as familiar as the creak of the floorboards. It felt like a life. That was the dangerous part. "They will send scouts first," Talisa said, breaking the silence. She didn't turn from the stove. "Before the main force, men who know the territory. They will ask questions in town, learn who lives where, who might hide someone like me." Dawson took a swallow of coffee. It tasted like charcoal. Already happened. Store owner in 10 Sleep was practically vibrating with the gossip yesterday. "And how long before that gossip includes your name?" "Hard to say. I don't exactly socialize. Most folks in 10 Sleep think I'm half crazy already, living out here alone." He paused. "But you're right. Eventually someone's going to remember seeing me buy extra flour. Wonder why a man with no family needs so much cornmeal." Talisa turned then, wooden spoon still in her hand. "We should leave before that happens. We've had this conversation, and we will have it again until you listen." Her voice was calm, but her eyes blazed. "You say I will die if I leave. Perhaps. But you will certainly die if I stay. Maybe I'm willing to take that chance." "Why?" The spoon clattered against the pot. "Why would you die for us? We are nothing to you, strangers, enemies even." Dawson set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "You keep asking me that like there's a good answer. There isn't. All I know is that if I let you walk out that door with a baby barely old enough to hold his own head up, and a little girl who's already carrying more weight than any child should, I'll spend the rest of my life seeing your bodies frozen in a ditch somewhere. And I've got enough ghosts already." Talisa stared at him. Then, slowly, she nodded. "You are a stubborn man, Dawson Kincaid." "Been called worse." "That does not make you less foolish." "Never said it did." She almost smiled. Then Rafe started crying from the bunk room, and she disappeared to tend to him, leaving Dawson alone with his coffee and the certain knowledge that this fragile peace couldn't last. The scouts came 3 days later. Dawson was in the barn trying to jury-rig a broken axle on his supply wagon when he heard horses. 2 riders coming up the main trail at an easy pace, not rushing, not sneaking, just riding in like they had every right to be there. He wiped the grease from his hands and walked out into the yard, keeping his expression neutral and his hand close to the pistol at his hip. The riders were cavalry. He could tell from the way they sat their mounts, that particular brand of arrogance that came from wearing a uniform in hostile territory. One was young, maybe 25, with a corporal's stripes and a face still soft enough to show every emotion. The other was older, harder, with sergeant's chevrons and eyes that had seen enough death to stop being impressed by it. The sergeant spoke first. "This the Kincaid Ranch?" "It is." Dawson didn't move from where he stood. "Something I can help you with?" "Name's Sergeant Hale. This here's Corporal Morrison. We're out of Fort Fetterman, tracking a fugitive." Hale pulled a folded poster from his coat and held it out. "Apache woman, traveling with children. You seen anyone matching that description?" Dawson took the poster, made a show of studying it, even though he'd already memorized every line of that crude sketch. "Can't say I have. Don't get many visitors out here?" "That's so." Hale's eyes traveled across the ranch, taking in the smoke from the chimney, the fresh tracks in the snow, the clothesline behind the house where Talisa had hung diapers to dry that morning. "Place looks pretty active for a man who doesn't get visitors." "I work the ranch. Activity tends to happen." Morrison, the young one, spoke up. "We heard in town you're a bit of a hermit, Mr. Kincaid. Keep to yourself. Don't much care for company." "You heard right." "So it'd be strange," Hale said slowly, "if we found evidence of someone else living here. A woman, say. Or children." Dawson's hand drifted closer to his pistol. "You calling me a liar, Sergeant?" "Just doing my job." Hale dismounted, his movements casual but his eyes sharp. See, thing is, the woman we're looking for is dangerous. Killed a guard during her escape. Could be holding someone hostage, forcing them to hide her. If that's the case, we're here to help. Appreciate the concern, but I don't need help. Then you won't mind if we take a look around. It wasn't a question. Dawson's mind raced. Talisa was in the house with Mira and Rafe. If these soldiers went inside, found them, it was over. They'd haul Talisa away in chains and probably arrest him as an accomplice. Best case scenario, he'd spend the next decade in a territorial prison. Worst case, they'd hang him alongside her. But if he refused to let them search, they'd know something was wrong. They'd come back with more men, more authority, and tear the place apart. He was about to make the worst gamble of his life when Mira appeared around the corner of the barn. She dirtied her face with soot, tied her hair back under one of Dawson's old hats, and wore an oversized coat that made her look like a ranch hand's boy instead of an Apache girl. She carried a bucket of chicken feed and walked with that same determined stride she'd perfected over the past weeks. "Pa," she called out, her English sharp and clear, with just a hint of the accent Dawson had heard from Wyoming-born ranch kids. "You want me to feed the hens now, or wait till after you fix that axle?" Dawson's heart stopped, then started again, harder. "After the axle," he said, his voice steady. "And make sure you latch that coop door proper this time. Lost 2 birds to foxes last week." "Yes, Pa." Mira walked past the soldiers without giving them a second glance, just a kid doing chores, and disappeared into the barn. Hale watched her go, his expression thoughtful. "Your daughter?" "That's right." "Funny, folks in town said you lived alone. Said your wife died years back." "She did." Dawson met Hale's gaze without flinching. "Mira's from my first marriage. Sent her to live with her aunt in Cheyenne after her mother passed. But the aunt died this winter, so she came back to me. Been meaning to get into town and tell folks, but you know how it is. Work piles up." It was a lie built on truth, solid enough to stand up to casual scrutiny. The question was whether Hale would push. For a long moment, the sergeant just looked at him. Then he glanced at Morrison. "Check the barn." Morrison dismounted and headed inside. Dawson forced himself to breathe normally, forced his hand away from his pistol. If they found Talisa hiding in there, if she'd been foolish enough not to stay in the house where she'd be less visible. Morrison emerged 2 minutes later, shaking his head. "Nothing but tools and feed, Sergeant. Oh, and that girl. She's really going at those chickens." Hale's jaw tightened. "The house?" "You'd need a warrant for that," Dawson said flatly. "Or a damn good reason. Harboring a fugitive's a damn good reason. Show me proof I'm harboring anyone and we'll talk about warrants." They stared at each other. Dawson could see the calculation happening behind Hale's eyes. Whether the effort of getting a warrant was worth it, whether this isolated ranch was really likely to be hiding anyone, whether a known hermit with a newly returned daughter was worth the paperwork. Finally, Hale remounted. "We'll be back through this area in a few weeks, Mr. Kincaid, doing a thorough sweep. If there's anything you want to tell us, now would be the time." "Nothing to tell." "Right." Hale gathered his reins. "You have a nice day now, and keep an eye out. That Apache woman's dangerous. Wouldn't want anything happening to your daughter." The threat was clear enough. Dawson nodded once, his face expressionless, and watched them ride away. He waited until they were completely out of sight before walking into the barn. Mira stood in the shadows, still holding the bucket of chicken feed, her whole body trembling. "You did good," Dawson said quietly. "They will come back." Her voice was small, child-sized, finally. "They will bring more men. Probably. And we will not be able to trick them again." "Probably not." Mira looked up at him, and for the first time since she'd knocked on his gate in the middle of a blizzard, she looked scared. "What will we do?" Dawson crouched down so they were eye level. "I don't know yet, but I promise you this. I'm not going to let them take your mother, or you, or your brother. You understand?" "How can you promise that?" "Because I already lost one family to violence I couldn't stop. I'll be damned if I lose another." It was only after the words left his mouth that he realized what he'd said. Another family, as if these 3 Apache strangers had somehow become his responsibility, his people, his to protect. Mira must have heard it too, because something in her face softened. "Thank you, Pa." The word hit him like a fist. He'd told her to call him that for the soldiers' benefit, but hearing it now in the quiet of the barn with no one to perform for felt different, felt real. "Come on," he said, standing up before the moment could crack him open further. "Let's go tell your mother we've got bigger problems than I thought." Inside the house, Talisa was pacing with Rafe against her shoulder, her face tight with worry. She'd heard the horses, heard the voices, and had hidden in the bunk room with the baby's mouth covered to keep him from crying out. "They're gone?" she asked as soon as Dawson entered. "For now. They will return." That seems to be the consensus. Dawson dropped into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "Mira bought us some time with a hell of a performance, but Hale's not stupid. He knows something's off. He'll be back with more men and more authority, and next time I won't be able to talk my way out of a search." Talisa stopped pacing. "Then we leave. Tonight." "In what? On what? You can barely walk more than a mile without needing rest, and Rafe can't handle cold like that. Hell, Mira can barely handle it, and she's tough as boot leather." "Then what do you suggest?" There was an edge in Talisa's voice now, something sharp and desperate. "We wait here until they come with chains? Until they drag me to a gallows and put my children in some mission school where they will forget their language, their names, their—" "No." Dawson stood up. "That's not what I'm suggesting." "Then what?" He looked at her, this woman who'd survived childbirth in a barn, who'd carried a newborn through a blizzard, who'd trusted a stranger enough to collapse on his property and hope for mercy, and made a decision that would either save them all or get them all killed. "I'm suggesting we don't run," he said. "I'm suggesting we make sure they've got nothing to find when they come back." Talisa frowned. "I do not understand." "You will." Dawson pulled on his coat. "Mira, you're with me. Talisa, stay inside. Keep the curtains drawn. Don't show yourself at any windows." "Where are you going?" "To visit an old friend." He checked his pistol, made sure his rifle was loaded. "And to buy us the kind of insurance the cavalry doesn't expect." The ride to Fort Fetterman took most of the day. Dawson pushed his horse hard, arriving at the fort just as the sun was setting, painting the wooden walls the color of old blood. The sentries recognized him. He'd been here before, years ago, trading information about Apache movements in exchange for supplies, and waved him through without much fuss. The man he needed to see was Captain Ellis, the quartermaster. They'd served together during the war back when Dawson still believed in causes, and Ellis still believed in following orders without question. Time had made them both cynical in different ways, but they'd kept in touch, sort of. Dawson found him in his office, surrounded by requisition forms and looking like he wanted to shoot himself. "Kincaid," Ellis said, glancing up, "tell me you've brought whiskey or a reason to abandon my post. Preferably both." "Neither. I need a favor." "Of course you do. Nobody rides this far just to chat." Ellis leaned back in his chair. "What kind of favor?" "The kind that might cost you your career if it goes wrong." Christ, you always did know how to make an entrance. Ellis waved at the chair across from his desk. "Sit. Talk. Convince me not to throw you out." Dawson sat. "There's a patrol out of here led by Sergeant Hale. They're searching for an Apache woman and her kids." "I know. I signed off on the orders yesterday. What about it?" "They came to my ranch, asked questions." Ellis's eyes sharpened. "And?" "And I'm asking you to call them off." "Why would I do that?" "Because the woman they're looking for isn't a murderer. She's a widow who ran from her own people because they were going to kill her baby. She gave birth in my barn during that blizzard 3 weeks back. If I'd thrown her out, she'd be dead. Her kids would be dead. I couldn't live with that." Ellis was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're hiding her." "I'm giving her shelter until she's strong enough to move on." "That's the same thing, Kincaid. Legally speaking, you're harboring a fugitive. If Hale finds out, and he will find out because he's a bloodhound, you'll hang alongside her." "I know. So why tell me?" Dawson leaned forward. "Because I need time. Time for her to heal. Time to figure out where she can go that's safe. And I need you to slow Hale down. Send him on wild goose chases. Make him check every ranch from here to the Montana border except mine. Give me 2 months, maybe 3. You're asking me to obstruct a military investigation. I'm asking you to remember who you used to be. Dawson's voice was quiet. Back when we wore the same uniform. Back when you still believed in the difference between justice and revenge. This woman didn't kill anyone, Ellis. She survived. That's her crime. Surviving when the army wanted her to die quietly. Ellis rubbed his face. You're going to get me court-martialed. Probably. And if I say no, then I'll figure something else out. But a lot of people will die in the process, and I thought you might want to avoid that. They looked at each other across the desk, two men who'd seen enough war to know that orders and morality didn't always align. Finally, Ellis sighed. I can give you 6 weeks, maybe 8 if I'm creative with the paperwork. After that, Hale's going to push back hard enough that even I won't be able to redirect him. That's all I need. It better be. Ellis pulled out a map. There's a settlement in New Mexico territory, near the border. Mexican families, Apache-friendly. They don't ask questions and they don't cooperate with American authorities. If your woman can make it there, she'll be safe. How far? 300 miles. Through mountains, deserts, and territory crawling with people who'd love to collect that bounty. Ellis marked the location with his finger. It's a hell of a ride, Kincaid, especially with kids. We'll manage. We? Ellis looked at him sharply. You're going with them? Dawson hadn't actually decided that until the word left his mouth. But now that it was out there, hanging in the air between them, he realized it was true. Yeah, he said. I'm going with them. That's suicide. Maybe. But it's my suicide to commit. Ellis shook his head slowly. You always were the stubborn one. Fine. I'll do what I can. But Kincaid, if this goes sideways, I never saw you. We never had this conversation. Understood. They shook hands. It felt like saying goodbye to more than just an old friend. It felt like saying goodbye to the last connection Dawson had to his former life. He rode home through the night, his mind already working on logistics. 300 miles, with a woman still recovering from childbirth, a 7-year-old girl, and a baby barely old enough to survive outside a warm room. They'd need supplies, horses, a route that avoided towns and army patrols. They'd need weapons, food, medicine. They'd need luck. Most of all, they'd need to leave before Hale came back. Dawn was breaking as Dawson rode into his yard. Talisa was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, her face gray with exhaustion and worry. I thought you were not coming back, she said. I always come back. He dismounted, tied off his horse. We need to talk. Inside, with Mira and Rafe both asleep, Dawson laid out the plan. The settlement in New Mexico, the 6-week window, the 300-mile journey through some of the most hostile territory on the continent. Talisa listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for so long that Dawson thought she might refuse. Then she said, You would leave your home for us? Home's just a building, and this place has more ghosts than good memories anyway. What about your wife, her grave? Dawson glanced at the photograph on the mantel. Margaret smiled out at him, frozen in a moment of happiness that felt like it belonged to a different man entirely. Margaret would understand, he said. She always hated seeing people suffer, would have taken you in herself probably, fed you, clothed you, lectured me about Christian charity until I wanted to strangle her. He paused. She's been dead 3 years. Time I stopped living like I'm dead too. Talisa reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time she'd voluntarily touched him, and the contact felt like an electric shock. Thank you, she said, for everything, for the mercy, for the risk, for... She struggled with the words. For seeing us as people instead of enemies. Yeah, well... Dawson squeezed her hand once, then pulled away before the moment could become more than he could handle. Don't thank me yet. We've got a long road ahead, and most of it's going to be hell. You might end up regretting this. I will not regret living. Talisa's voice was fierce. Even if we die trying, I will not regret choosing life over surrender. Then we better make sure we don't die. They spent the next week preparing. Dawson traded for horses in small transactions spread across 3 towns, never buying more than 1 animal in any single place. He stockpiled supplies, dried meat, hardtack, ammunition, blankets, hiding them in the barn where curious eyes wouldn't find them. He studied maps until he had the route memorized, picking trails that avoided settlements and marked water sources that might still be accessible in late winter. Talisa regained her strength with a speed that surprised him. She pushed herself hard, walking farther each day, carrying Rafe for longer periods, preparing her body for the ordeal ahead. Mira trained alongside her, the girl's endurance impressive for her age. In the evenings, Talisa taught Dawson basic Apache phrases. He was a terrible student, his tongue stumbling over sounds that didn't exist in English, but he persisted. If they were going to survive this journey, if they were going to pass as something other than what they were, he needed to understand her language. One night, as they sat by the fire reviewing vocabulary, Talisa said, "Your name, Dawson. In Apache, it would be Dodson, means strong mountain. Fitting, I think." "And Talisa? What's it mean?" "Beautiful flower." She smiled slightly. "My mother had hopes I would be delicate. I disappointed her. I'm sure she got over it. She did not live long enough to know." Talisa's smile faded. "She died bringing me into the world. My father raised me to be hard because soft things do not survive." Dawson understood that philosophy. He'd lived it himself. "Rafe," he said, changing the subject, "that's not an Apache name." "No, his father, my husband, he wanted him to have a white name. Thought it might protect him someday." She looked down at the baby sleeping in her arms. "I do not know if he was right, but I keep the name anyway, to honor the hope, even if the hope was foolish." They lapsed into silence. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Inside, the fire crackled. "When we leave," Talisa said finally, "what will happen to this place? Your home?" "Nothing. It'll sit here until someone comes along and claims it, or it'll fall apart from neglect. Either way, I don't care." "You say that, but I see how you look at it. This place, it is part of you." Maybe it was. But Dawson was learning that some parts of yourself had to be left behind if you wanted to keep moving forward. On the 13th day after the soldier's visit, just as dawn was painting the sky pink, Hale came back. This time he had 8 men with him. Dawson saw them coming from a mile away, a dark line of riders against the snow. He'd been expecting this, dreading it, but expecting it nonetheless. "They're here," he called into the house. Talisa appeared instantly, Rafe bundled against her chest, fear naked on her face. Now. They'd rehearsed this. Talisa and the children would hide in the root cellar, a small space beneath the kitchen that was accessible only through a trapdoor hidden under a rug. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best they had. Dawson waited until he heard the trapdoor close before walking out to meet Hale. The sergeant dismounted slowly, his eyes taking in every detail of the ranch. "Mr. Kincaid, hope we're not interrupting anything." "Depends on your definition of interrupting." Dawson kept his hands visible, his voice level. "What can I do for you, Sergeant?" "We're back to conduct that search I mentioned. Got the proper warrant this time." Hale pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Everything legal and above board." "How thoughtful." "Where's your daughter?" "At the Johnsons' place. Borrowed her out for the week to help with their new baby." It was a lie, but a plausible one. The Johnsons lived 15 miles south and had a reputation for borrowing help from neighbors. Hale studied him. "That's so. Mind if we verify that?" "Feel free, but you'll be riding out of your way for nothing." "We'll take that chance." Hale nodded to 2 of his men. "Morrison, Blake, head to the Johnsons, rest of you, with me." Dawson's heart rate spiked, but he kept his expression neutral as 6 soldiers spread out across his property. They searched the barn, the sheds, even the chicken coop. They were thorough and methodical, leaving no corner unexplored. Then they entered the house. Dawson followed, watching as they tore through his possessions with practiced efficiency. They checked the bunk room, found nothing but an empty cot. They searched the main bedroom, the kitchen, overturning furniture and pulling up floorboards. One soldier stood directly on the rug that covered the root cellar. Dawson forced himself to breathe normally. Forced himself not to look at that spot. Forced himself to trust that Talisa had the sense to keep Rafe absolutely silent. "Nothing here, Sergeant," the soldier reported. Hale's jaw tightened. He walked through the house himself, his eyes sharp, looking for anything out of place. He stopped at the mantel, staring at Margaret's photograph. "Your wife was pretty," he said. "She was. Must have loved her a lot." "I did." "Then you understand why I'm doing this." Hale turned to face him. "I lost men to Apache raids, good men, men with wives and children of their own. When I hunt down someone who killed one of my soldiers, it's not personal, it's justice." "The woman you're hunting didn't kill anyone," Dawson said. "That's propaganda meant to justify whatever you're planning to do when you find her." "You seem awfully sure about that." "I'm sure that the Army has a long history of lying about Apache violence to cover up their own." Hale's eyes went cold. "Careful, Kincaid. You're starting to sound like an Apache sympathizer." "I'm just stating facts." "Facts." Hale stepped closer. "Here's a fact. You're living alone on an isolated ranch, buying supplies for more people than just yourself, and acting nervous as hell every time I show up. That tells me you're hiding something. Or it tells you I don't like soldiers tramping through my house." They stared at each other. Under their feet, hidden in darkness, Talisa held her children and prayed to gods Dawson didn't know. Finally, Hale stepped back. "We're done here. For now." "Always a pleasure, Sergeant." Hale mounted his horse, but before riding away, he leaned down. "I know you're hiding her, Kincaid. I don't know where or how, but I know. And when I prove it, I'm going to enjoy watching you hang." Then he was gone, his men trailing behind him like a dark promise. Dawson waited until they were completely out of sight before opening the trapdoor. Talisa climbed out, her face streaked with tears, Rafe miraculously still asleep in her arms. Mira followed, trembling so hard her teeth chattered. "We leave tonight," Dawson said. "No more waiting. Pack only what you can carry on horseback. We ride at midnight." Talisa nodded. She didn't argue, didn't question. She just began to prepare. As darkness fell over the ranch, Dawson took one last walk through the house Margaret had loved. He touched the walls she'd painted, the table where they'd eaten dinner, the bed where they'd slept wrapped around each other. "I'm sorry," he whispered to her ghost, "but I can't stay here anymore. Can't keep living like I died with you." He imagined he heard her voice, warm and full of the kindness that had defined her. "Then go. Live. Love if you can. I'll wait for you, but not here. Not in this place that's become a tomb." Dawson packed his saddlebags with hands that didn't shake, made his preparations with a mind that had finally accepted what came next. At midnight, under a sky scattered with stars, 3 horses stood ready in the yard. Talisa mounted with Rafe. Mira rode behind Dawson. Their supplies were distributed, their route planned. "Ready?" Dawson asked. "No," Talisa said, "but we go anyway." They rode out of the valley as snow began to fall, heading south toward a future that promised only hardship and danger and a small chance at freedom. Behind them, Dawson's ranch faded into darkness. He didn't look back. Some things, once left behind, couldn't be reclaimed. He'd learned that when Margaret died. He was learning it again now, in a different way, with different stakes. The difference was that this time he was choosing to leave, choosing to risk everything for people who'd started as strangers and become something more. The snow fell harder. The horses trudged through drifts that reached their knees. And somewhere ahead, in the vast darkness of Wyoming territory, lay 300 miles of winter and war and the faint, desperate hope of sanctuary. The first 3 days passed in a blur of cold and exhaustion. They traveled only at night, hiding during the day in whatever cover they could find. Abandoned line shacks, caves, dense stands of pine that blocked the wind but never the cold. Dawson pushed them hard, knowing that every mile between them and Fort Fetterman was a mile closer to safety, but also knowing that Talisa was still weak and Mira was just a child, no matter how tough she pretended to be. On the 4th morning, as they huddled in a ravine waiting for darkness, Rafe developed a cough. It started as a small thing, barely noticeable. But by that evening, as they saddled the horses, the cough had become a wet, rattling sound that made Dawson's stomach clench. He'd heard that sound before, during the war, pneumonia. It killed more soldiers than bullets ever did. "How bad is it?" he asked Talisa as they rode. She adjusted Rafe in the sling across her chest, her face tight. "Bad enough. He needs warmth, rest, Medicine we do not have. There's a trading post about 20 miles southeast, small place run by a Frenchman named Beaumont. He doesn't ask questions, and he's got a stock of quinine and other medicines. It is too dangerous. If someone recognizes us, if we don't get medicine, Rafe dies. That's simple enough for you? Talisa's jaw tightened, but she nodded. They reached Beaumont's just after midnight. The trading post was little more than a log cabin with a false front, but lamplight glowed in the windows, which meant Beaumont was awake. The man kept strange hours, catering to travelers who preferred darkness for their business dealings. Dawson dismounted and handed his reins to Talisa. Stay here. Out of sight. If anything goes wrong, you ride. Don't wait for me. Dawson, that's not a request. He walked to the door and knocked 3 times, the signal Beaumont used for trusted customers. The door opened a crack, revealing a grizzled face and suspicious eyes. Kincaid! Mon Dieu, I heard you were dead. Not yet. I need quinine, willow bark, anything good for fever and lung sickness. Beaumont's eyes narrowed. For yourself? Does it matter? It matters if you're harboring that Apache woman everyone's looking for. Beaumont opened the door wider. There's a bounty now, you know, $500. That's a lot of money for a woman and 2 children. Dawson's hand moved to his pistol. You thinking about collecting? Me? No. I am thinking about staying alive, which means not getting involved in other people's troubles. Beaumont gestured inside. Come, I have what you need. But you owe me, Kincaid. You owe me for keeping my mouth shut. I'll pay. Inside, the trading post smelled of tobacco, leather, and the peculiar mustiness of goods that had traveled too far and been stored too long. Beaumont pulled bottles from his shelves with practiced efficiency, wrapping them in cloth and stuffing them into a leather bag. This fever, he said as he worked, it is for the baby, yes? The one born in your barn? Dawson said nothing. I hear things, Beaumont continued. I hear a blizzard, a woman giving birth, a man who should have turned her away but did not. I hear soldiers asking questions, offering rewards. I hear many things. He handed over the bag. I also hear that you are planning something very stupid, something that will get you killed. Your hearing's too good. Perhaps. Beaumont leaned against his counter. Or perhaps I simply recognize a man who has chosen to die for a cause. You have that look about you now, that light in the eyes that says, I have found something worth the bullet. How much for the medicine? For you? Nothing. Consider it a gift for an old customer. But Kincaid, Beaumont's voice turned serious. The soldiers, they are not the only ones looking. There are bounty hunters now, men who do not care about warrants or rules, men who will kill everyone, take the bodies back, and collect the reward without asking questions. You understand? I understand. Then you understand that you are riding toward death, all of you. Maybe, but we're riding anyway. Beaumont shook his head slowly. You are a fool, mon ami, but you are a brave fool. For what little it is worth, I hope you make it. They shook hands. Dawson left with the medicine and the certain knowledge that his time was running out faster than he'd hoped. Outside, Talisa waited with Mira, both of them tense as bowstrings. Dawson handed over the bag and mounted his horse without explanation. They rode hard for 2 hours, putting distance between themselves and the trading post, before stopping to administer the first dose of quinine to Rafe. The baby fought it, his small face screwing up in disgust at the bitter taste. But Talisa was patient and persistent. Eventually he swallowed, then fell into a fitful sleep against her chest. Will it work? Mira asked, her voice small in the darkness. It should, Dawson said, if we caught it early enough, if he's strong enough. And if he is not? Dawson looked at the girl, this child who'd already lost so much, who'd seen too much death for her age, and couldn't bring himself to lie. Then we keep riding anyway, because stopping means dying for all of us. Mira nodded, accepting this truth with a solemnity that broke something in Dawson's chest. They traveled for another week, moving through terrain that grew progressively more hostile. The snow gave way to frozen ground, then to rocky badlands where water was scarce and shelter even scarcer. Rafe's cough improved with the medicine, but slowly, requiring constant attention and careful rationing of their medical supplies. On the 12th night, they made camp in a narrow canyon that offered protection from the wind. Dawson was checking the horses when he heard it. The distant sound of riders, too many to be anything but trouble. "Up," he hissed to Talisa. "Now, leave the fire." They scrambled to saddle the horses, working in near total darkness. The riders were close now, close enough that Dawson could hear voices echoing off the canyon walls. He got Mira mounted, helped Talisa with Rafe, and was swinging into his own saddle when a gunshot cracked through the night. The bullet ricocheted off stone 3 feet from his head. "Ride!" Dawson shouted, slapping Talisa's horse on the rump. She didn't need to be told twice. She dug in her heels and the horse bolted, Mira's mount following close behind. Dawson fired 3 shots blindly into the darkness, not aiming to hit anything, just buying time, then wheeled his horse and galloped after them. Behind him, men shouted. More shots rang out, muzzle flashes lighting up the canyon like lightning. Dawson bent low over his horse's neck, feeling bullets whisper past his head, hearing them thunk into the canyon walls with wet, meaty sounds. They burst out of the canyon into open ground, and that's when Dawson saw them, riders coming from the east, cutting off their escape route. Not soldiers. These men wore no uniforms, just trail gear and gun belts. Bounty hunters. "Left!" Dawson shouted. "Cut left toward the river!" Talisa veered hard, her horse sliding in loose shale. Mira followed. Dawson brought up the rear, twisting in his saddle to fire at their pursuers. One man went down, his horse stumbling. The others kept coming. The river wasn't really a river at this time of year, more like a wide creek running between ice-crusted banks. But it was water, and water meant cover. Dawson splashed into it, felt his horse lurch as its hooves hit the rocky bottom, then scramble for purchase on the far side. Talisa made it across. Mira made it across. But as Dawson urged his horse up the bank, a bullet caught the animal in the flank. The horse screamed and went down hard, throwing Dawson clear. He hit the ground rolling, came up with his rifle, and started firing. "Go!" he screamed at Talisa. "God damn it, go!" But she'd already turned back, already sliding off her horse with Rafe clutched to her chest. She pulled Dawson's rifle from the saddle scabbard on his dying horse and threw it to him, then grabbed his arm and hauled him toward her mount. "You do not give me orders," she said, her voice fierce. "We ride together or we die together." There was no time to argue. Dawson swung up behind her, awkward with Rafe between them, and Talisa kicked the horse into a gallop. Mira rode ahead, looking back with terrified eyes. The bounty hunters reached the river and paused, their horses blowing hard. Dawson counted 5 of them. No, 6. Bad odds, even if he'd had cover and ammunition to spare. "Keep riding," he told Talisa. "Don't stop until dawn." "What about you?" "I'm right here." But even as he said it, he was calculating angles and distances. The bounty hunters would catch up eventually. Their horses were fresher, and Talisa's mount was now carrying double weight. They needed an advantage. They needed something to even the odds. 2 miles later, Dawson saw it. A narrow pass between 2 rock formations, barely wide enough for a horse to squeeze through. The rocks on either side rose 20 feet high, creating a perfect choke point. "Through there," he said, pointing. "Fast as you can." They rode through single file, the horse's sides scraping stone. On the far side, the ground opened up into a small clearing surrounded by boulders. Dawson dismounted, pulled his rifle, and positioned himself behind cover with a clear view of the pass. "Take Mira and Rafe," he told Talisa. "Ride south. Follow the creek bed until you hit the old wagon trail. Stay on it until you reach the cottonwood grove. Wait for me there." "You are staying to fight." "I'm staying to slow them down. They will kill you." "Maybe, but if I don't stop them here, they'll run us down in open ground and kill all of us." He checked his ammunition. 12 rounds left. Not nearly enough, but it would have to do. "Go, Talisa, please." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes unreadable in the starlight. Then she leaned down and kissed him. It was brief, barely more than a brush of lips, but it hit Dawson like a thunderbolt. Before he could react, she'd pulled back, gathered Mira and Rafe, and disappeared into the darkness. Dawson settled into position, his heart hammering for reasons that had nothing to do with the approaching bounty hunters. They came 5 minutes later, riding cautiously now, aware they were being funneled through terrain that favored defenders. The first rider entered the pass, and Dawson let him come halfway through before firing. The shot took the man in the shoulder, spinning him off his horse. The animal panicked and bolted back through the pass, causing chaos among the riders behind. Dawson fired again, aiming for horses this time. He wasn't trying to kill anyone if he could help it, just make pursuit impossible. 2 more horses went down. Men scattered, taking cover, returning fire. Bullets pinged off the rocks around Dawson's position, showering him with stone chips. He shifted left, fired twice more, then shifted right as return fire chewed up the spot where he'd been. His rifle clicked empty. He reloaded, his fingers working by memory in the darkness. Fired again. Again. Making every shot count, making every bullet buy another few minutes for Talisa and the children to put distance between themselves and this nightmare. Then, silence. Dawson waited, his breath coming in harsh gasps, his ears ringing from gunfire. Had they retreated? Given up? Or were they... A voice called out from the darkness. "Kincaid, we know it's you." He didn't answer. "You're protecting that Apache squaw, the one who killed Corporal Hayes." "She didn't kill anyone," Dawson shouted back before he could stop himself. "Army says different. Says she cut his throat during her escape. Says there's $500 on her head, dead or alive." "Army's lying. Don't matter to us. Money spends the same either way." A pause. "You give her up now, we'll let you ride out of here. Keep your life. Keep whatever she's paying you." Dawson almost laughed. "She's not paying me anything." "Then you're an even bigger fool than we thought." Another pause. "Last chance, Kincaid. Give her up or we come in there and take her. And you." Dawson's answer was to fire 3 quick shots into the pass, forcing whoever was out there to keep their heads down. "Your funeral," the voice shouted. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then Dawson heard it. The sound of men moving through rock, circling his position. They were going around, using the boulder field to flank him. Smart. Exactly what he would have done. He waited until they were close, until he could hear their breathing and the scrape of boots on stone. Then he stood up and fired point blank at the nearest shadow. The man dropped. Dawson fired again, clipping another hunter's leg. Then he was running, vaulting over rocks, using every bit of cover he could find as bullets chased him through the darkness. He made it 30 yards before a bullet caught him in the side. The impact spun him around and dropped him to his knees. His rifle clattered away across the rocks. Through a haze of pain, he saw 3 hunters approaching, their pistols drawn, their faces grim with purpose. "Should have taken the deal," one of them said. Dawson's hand found his Colt. He pulled it, but his movements were slow, clumsy. The hunters raised their weapons. The gunshot that followed didn't come from them. It came from behind Dawson, from the direction he'd sent Talisa. One hunter dropped, clutching his chest. The other 2 spun around, searching for the shooter. Talisa stepped out from behind a boulder, Dawson's rifle, the one from his dead horse, braced against her shoulder. She fired again, working the lever action with practiced efficiency. Another hunter went down. The 3rd hunter aimed at her. Dawson used the last of his strength to raise his Colt and fire. The bullet caught the man in the leg, dropping him. Then silence fell, broken only by the moans of wounded men and Dawson's ragged breathing. Talisa was at his side instantly, her hands probing his wound. "You are shot." "Noticed that." "You told me to ride." "You're terrible at following orders." "Yes." She ripped fabric from her skirt, wadding it against his side. The pressure sent white-hot pain through his body. "But you are alive because I did not follow them." She was right, of course. If she'd kept riding, he'd be dead right now. "Where's Mira, Rafe?" "Hidden, safe. I left them and came back for you." "Stupid." "Yes." She helped him to his feet, slinging his arm across her shoulders. "We are both very stupid. Now walk, before more come." They staggered through the darkness together, leaving the wounded bounty hunters behind. Dawson's side burned with every step, blood soaking through the makeshift bandage. But he kept moving, kept putting one foot in front of the other, because stopping meant dying, and he'd be damned if he'd die now after coming this far. They found Mira and Rafe in the cottonwood grove, the girl standing guard over her baby brother with a stick clutched in her hands like a weapon. When she saw Dawson bleeding, her face crumpled. "Is he—" "He is alive," Talisa said. "Help me get him on the horse." Somehow, they managed it. Dawson slumped in the saddle while Talisa mounted behind him, her arms around his waist to keep him from falling. Mira rode ahead on the remaining horse, Rafe bundled in a sling across her narrow chest. They rode through what remained of the night, traveling slow now because Dawson couldn't handle anything faster. As dawn broke, painting the sky shades of pink and gold, they found shelter in an abandoned homestead. Just a dugout carved into a hillside, its door hanging off one hinge, but it was dry and hidden from casual view. Talisa lowered Dawson to the dirt floor and began examining his wound in the morning light. The bullet had gone through clean, missing anything vital, but he'd lost blood and the entrance wound showed early signs of infection. "This will hurt," Talisa warned. "Everything hurts." She poured whiskey over the wound. Dawson had brought it for exactly this purpose, and he bit back a scream as liquid fire burned through his body. Then she packed it with clean cloth and bound it tight. "You saved my life," Dawson said when he could speak again. "You saved mine first. In the barn. In the snow." Talisa met his eyes. "We are even now." "That's not how it works." "No?" She touched his face, her fingers gentle. "Then how does it work, Dawson Kincaid?" He wanted to answer, wanted to explain the complicated tangle of obligation and choice and something else he didn't have words for, but exhaustion pulled at him like an anchor, dragging him down into darkness. "Stay," he mumbled. "Just stay." "I will stay." Her voice seemed to come from very far away. "I will always stay now." He fell asleep to the sound of her humming an Apache lullaby, the same one she sang to Rafe, and somewhere in his fever-addled brain he understood that everything had changed during that firefight in the rocks, that he'd stopped running from one ghost and started running toward a different kind of life entirely. When he woke, it was twilight, and someone was cooking over a small fire. The smell made his stomach clench with hunger. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his side. "Slowly," Talisa said, appearing at his side. "You tore the stitches twice already." "You stitched me?" "Who else?" She helped him into a sitting position, propping him against the dugout wall. "It is not pretty, but it will hold, if you do not do anything stupid." "Too late for that." She almost smiled. "Yes, far too late." Mira brought him water, and he drank gratefully, tasting minerals and cold that spoke of mountain runoff. The girl looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but she was unharmed. "How long was I out?" "A day, a night, another day." Talisa ladled something from the pot over the fire, rabbit stew, from the smell. "You had fever, you talked in your sleep." "What'd I say?" "Many things, your wife's name, your mother's, mine." She handed him a bowl. "You apologized many times, to many people. It was—" She searched for the word. "Sad." Dawson took the bowl, though he wasn't sure he could keep anything down. "We need to keep moving. Every day we sit still is a day they get closer." "You cannot ride." "I'll manage." "Dawson, we don't have a choice." He forced down a spoonful of stew. It tasted like heaven. "How far to the border?" 200 miles, maybe less." Talisa sat beside him. "But in your condition, it might as well be 2,000. "Then we better hope my condition improves fast." They stared at the fire for a while, not speaking. Mira had taken Rafe outside to change him, giving them privacy that felt both welcome and dangerous. "Why did you come back?" Dawson asked finally. "At the pass. You could have kept riding, should have kept riding. Because you would have died." "So?" Talisa looked at him, her eyes reflecting firelight. "So I am tired of watching people die. Tired of losing everyone I—" She stopped, started again. "You risked everything for us. Your home, your safety, your life. And you asked nothing in return except that we survive. How could I abandon you to death after such Goka?" "Goka. You said that before. Compassion when hate is easier." "Yes, but it is more than compassion. It is—" She touched his hand. "It is choosing to see the person inside the enemy, choosing to save them even when everything says you should not. That what you did? Saw the person inside the enemy? Yes. Her voice was soft. I saw a man broken by loss who still had enough strength to carry strangers out of the snow. I saw someone who hated my people but loved mercy more than hate. I saw... She hesitated. I saw someone worth saving. Dawson's throat tightened. Talisa, you do not have to say anything. I know you still love your wife. I know I can never be what she was. But I need you to know that you are not alone in this anymore. Whatever happens, we face it together, as family. Family. The word hung between them, fragile and terrifying. I don't know how to do that anymore, Dawson said. Be family. I've been alone so long I'm not sure I remember. Then we learn together. She squeezed his hand. My people have a saying, the pack survives what the lone wolf cannot. You have been a lone wolf too long, Dawson. Let yourself be pack again. Before he could respond, Mira returned with Rafe, and the moment passed. But something had shifted between them. Some wall had come down, and Dawson felt both lighter and more burdened for it. They stayed in the dugout for 3 more days while Dawson healed. It wasn't enough time. He needed weeks, not days, but they couldn't wait any longer. Riders had been spotted on the southern horizon, and whether they were soldiers or bounty hunters or just travelers, Dawson couldn't risk finding out. On the 4th morning, they saddled up and rode south. Dawson's wound ached with every stride, but he gritted his teeth and endured. They had nearly 200 miles still to go, through territory that would only get more dangerous as they approached the border. New Mexico territory was a lawless place where American authority ended and Mexican authority was more suggestion than reality. It was also where Apache war bands still operated, where bandits preyed on travelers, where a man could disappear and never be found. It was exactly where they needed to go. The landscape changed as they traveled, from Wyoming's rocky badlands to Colorado's high plains, then down into New Mexico's red earth and scattered mesas. Water became scarce. They rationed what they had, using every trick Talisa knew to find springs and catch rain. Rafe's cough returned despite the medicine, and this time it didn't improve. The baby grew listless, his cries weakening to whimpers. Talisa tried everything, keeping him warm, feeding him goat's milk mixed with honey they'd traded for, even using Apache healing songs that her mother had taught her. Nothing worked. On the 17th night of their journey, Rafe stopped breathing. Dawson woke to the sound of Talisa's scream, a raw, animal sound of grief that chilled his blood. He bolted upright despite the pain in his side and found her kneeling over Rafe's small body, her hands on his chest, trying desperately to make him breathe. No, 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 she chanted. Breathe, please breathe, please. Dawson pulled her away gently. The baby's lips were blue. His skin was cold. He was gone. Talisa, he's... No! She fought him, clawing to get back to Rafe. He is just sleeping. He needs... He's gone. Dawson held her as she thrashed, his own eyes burning. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, but he's gone. The sound she made then would haunt him forever. Grief and rage and despair all twisted together into something that barely sounded human. She collapsed against him, her whole body shaking, and Dawson held her while she wept for the child she'd carried through snow and bullets and 300 miles of hell, only to lose him within sight of safety. Mira stood frozen at the edge of their camp, tears streaming down her face, and Dawson realized with crushing clarity that this little girl had just lost her baby brother, had watched him die slowly despite everything they'd tried. Come here, he said to Mira, opening one arm. She came, and he held them both, this shattered family that had somehow become his, while the night pressed in around them and a baby who'd barely lived lay still and silent in the dirt. They buried Rafe at dawn in a small grave beneath a cottonwood tree, wrapped in the cleanest cloth they had. Talisa sang the death songs of her people, her voice cracking on notes that spoke of journeys to the spirit world. Mira placed wildflowers on the mound of earth, her face carved from stone. Dawson carved a marker from a piece of driftwood. Rafe, born in snow, died reaching for warmth. It wasn't much, but it was all they could do. As they rode away, Talisa turned back once to look at the grave, and Dawson saw something die in her eyes, some last piece of hope or innocence or belief that the world could be kind. "We keep going," she said, her voice flat. "We do not stop until we reach the settlement. And then," she paused, "and then I do not know." Dawson understood. What was the point of running if all you did was lose pieces of yourself along the way? What was the point of survival if everything you were trying to survive for got buried in shallow graves? But they rode anyway, because stopping meant giving up, and neither of them knew how to do that yet. The settlement was another 100 miles south. They would make it, or they wouldn't. They would find safety, or they wouldn't. Either way, they'd paid a price that could never be refunded. Dawson looked at Talisa riding beside him, her face empty of everything but determination, and made a silent vow to whatever gods might be listening. If they survived this, if they made it to safety, he would spend the rest of his life making sure she never had to lose anything else. It was the least he could do for the woman who'd saved his life, for the family he'd chosen when he'd stopped being a lone wolf and learned to run with a pack again, even if that pack was smaller now, even if the cost was written in a small grave beneath a cottonwood tree. They rode on as the sun climbed higher, and the border waited ahead like a promise that might be a lie. The days after Rafe's death blurred together like watercolors left in the rain. Talisa spoke only when necessary, her voice stripped of emotion, her eyes fixed on some distant point that Dawson couldn't see. Mira withdrew into herself, becoming a ghost of the competent child she'd been, moving through camp duties with mechanical precision but no spark of life. They were surviving, but barely. The grief sat between them like a fourth traveler, silent and suffocating. Dawson tried to fill the silence with plans and logistics. They were 60 miles from the border now, maybe less. The terrain had shifted to high desert, red rock formations and scrub brush, with mountains rising purple in the distance. Water was scarce enough that they traveled from spring to spring using a map Captain Ellis had drawn, each source marked with careful notation about flow rate and reliability. On the 23rd night of their journey, they made camp in an arroyo that offered protection from the wind but little else. Dawson was checking the horses when he heard voices carried on the evening air. Not close, but not far enough away for comfort. He signaled to Talisa, who immediately extinguished their small fire and gathered Mira into the shadows. The voices grew clearer. Men speaking Spanish, their words punctuated by laughter. Dawson counted at least 4 distinct speakers, maybe 5. They were moving parallel to the arroyo, close enough that he could hear the jingle of tack and the soft thud of hoofbeats on packed earth. Then one voice rose above the others, speaking in English with a thick accent. "The American Army, they pay good money for Apache woman and child. $500. Maybe we find them before the soldiers, eh? Maybe we get rich." Dawson's blood turned cold. These weren't just travelers. They were hunters. Bounty men working the territory between American and Mexican jurisdiction, where rules were suggestions and violence was currency. The voices faded as the riders moved on, but the damage was done. They'd been discussing Talisa, which meant word had spread south of the border, which meant the net was tightening from both sides. When the night was fully dark, Dawson risked a low whisper. "They're gone." Talisa emerged from the shadows with Mira. Even in the dim starlight, Dawson could see the fear on their faces, the first real emotion he'd seen from either of them in days. "They're looking for us," Talisa said. It wasn't a question. "Sounds like it. Then we cannot cross at the usual places. The border towns, they will be watched." "I know. So where do we cross?" Dawson pulled out Ellis's map, though he'd memorized it days ago. "There's a canyon about 40 miles southeast of here. Steep walls, narrow passage, runs right along the border. Ellis marked it as dangerous. Flash flood risk, Apache raiders, but it's remote. No settlements, no patrols. And if we get trapped in a canyon during a storm, then we die. But at least we die free instead of dangling from a rope." Talisa looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "We go through the canyon." They broke camp before dawn and rode hard, pushing the horses to their limits. The landscape grew more dramatic as they traveled. Towering rock formations that looked like ancient sentinels, valleys carved by water that ran only during the brief rainy season, earth the color of dried blood. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way that reminded Dawson of Talisa herself. By midday on the second day, they reached the canyon. It was everything Ellis had described and worse. The entrance was barely wide enough for a horse, the walls rising 300 feet on either side, the floor littered with boulders and debris from past floods. A thin stream trickled down the center, evidence that somewhere upstream water still flowed. "This is madness," Talisa said, staring into the dark passage. "Yeah." Dawson dismounted and began leading his horse forward on foot. "But it's our kind of madness." The canyon swallowed them whole. Sunlight penetrated only as thin strips that shifted as they walked, leaving them in a twilight gloom that played tricks on the eyes. The walls seemed to lean inward, creating a sensation of being slowly crushed. Every sound echoed, hoofbeats, breathing, the scrape of leather against stone. They'd traveled maybe 2 miles when Dawson heard it, a sound that didn't belong, not behind them, but ahead. "Stop," he hissed. They froze. The sound came again. Voices speaking in Apache, echoing off the canyon walls in ways that made it impossible to judge distance or direction. Dawson's hand went to his rifle, though he knew that firing in this confined space would be suicide. The ricochets alone could kill them all. A figure appeared around a bend in the canyon, then another, then 5 more. Apache warriors dressed in a mixture of traditional and stolen clothing, armed with rifles and bows. They stopped when they saw Dawson's group, surprise registering on their faces. One of them, a man with gray streaking his braids and 3 eagle feathers in his hair, stepped forward. He spoke in rapid Apache, his tone demanding. Talisa responded, her voice steady despite the fear Dawson could see in her eyes. The exchange continued for several minutes, the warrior's expression shifting from suspicion to something that looked almost like recognition. Finally, Talisa turned to Dawson. "He says we are trespassing on sacred ground, that white men are not permitted here. Tell him we're just passing through, we don't want trouble," she translated. The warrior responded, his words sharp. "He says all white men bring trouble, that you are probably soldiers or prospectors, here to steal more land." Talisa paused. "He wants to know why you travel with Apache." "Tell him the truth." Talisa took a breath and spoke at length in her native tongue. Dawson watched the warriors' faces as she talked, saw suspicion gradually give way to something else, interest maybe, or calculation. When she finished, the gray-haired warrior was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that made Talisa's eyes widen. "What?" Dawson asked. "What did he say?" "He says he knows who I am, that I was married to Naichi's brother." She swallowed. "He says I am widow to a great chief, and that I am welcome among them, that they will protect me from the American soldiers." "That's good, right?" "He says you must leave, that white men are not permitted to stay, even those who travel with Apache wives." She met Dawson's eyes. "He says I can go with them. They will take me to their camp in the mountains, but you—" She didn't finish. Dawson looked at the warriors, then at Talisa. "No." "Dawson, I said no. We've come 300 miles together. We buried a child together. I'm not walking away now just because some—" He stopped, aware that insulting these men while outnumbered in a canyon was poor strategy. "Tell him I'm not leaving without you. Tell him we're family." Talisa spoke rapidly. The warrior responded, his tone skeptical. A debate ensued with several other warriors joining in. Voices rose, echoing off stone until it sounded like 100 men arguing instead of 7. Finally, the gray-haired warrior raised his hand for silence. He looked at Dawson with eyes that had seen too much war, too much death, and spoke slowly so Talisa could translate. "He says you are either very brave or very stupid, that most white men would have abandoned me long ago, taken the reward money, and lived well." Talisa's voice shook slightly. "He says there is a test. If you pass, you may stay with me under their protection. If you fail—" She trailed off. "What kind of test?" The warrior gestured toward the canyon ahead, speaking in heavily accented English. "You walk alone, to the end. If ancestors accept you, you live. If not," he shrugged. "Canyon, keep your bones." Dawson looked at the passage ahead. It was getting narrower, darker. He had no idea what ancestors accepting him meant, but he knew a death sentence when he heard one. How far to the end? Maybe 1 mile, maybe 2, in places very narrow. White men, they panic. They get stuck. They die. The warrior's expression was unreadable. You strong enough? Heart strong enough? Dawson thought about turning back, about refusing the test, taking Talisa and Mira, and riding back the way they'd come. But that way led to soldiers and bounty hunters and a noose with Talisa's name on it. This way, at least, offered a chance. I'll do it, he said. Dawson, no. Talisa grabbed his arm. This is a trap. They will kill you. Maybe, but if I don't try, we're both dead anyway. At least this way you and Mira have a chance. I do not want a chance without you. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Dawson pulled her close, feeling her shake against him. I'll come back, he whispered into her hair. I've survived worse than a canyon. You have survived nothing like this. Then I'll survive it anyway, because I promised you I wouldn't let them take you, and I keep my promises. He pulled away before she could argue further and handed his rifle to the gray-haired warrior. For when I come back. The warrior took it with something that might have been respect. If you come back. Dawson started walking. The canyon narrowed almost immediately. Within 100 yards, the walls were close enough that he could touch both sides with his outstretched arms. The floor became more treacherous. Boulders to climb over, crevices to navigate. Places where water had carved the rock smooth as glass. He moved carefully, testing each step, aware that a broken ankle here would be a death sentence. The light faded. He was in near total darkness now, navigating by touch, and the faint glow of sky far above. The walls pressed in until he had to turn sideways to continue, his chest scraping against stone. His breathing echoed strangely, coming back to him distorted and foreign. This was what claustrophobia felt like. Dawson had never experienced it before. He'd always been comfortable in tight spaces, unfazed by mines or root cellars or cramped quarters. But this was different. This was like being swallowed by the earth itself, feeling the weight of rock above and around and below, knowing that one shift in the wrong direction could trap him here forever. He forced himself to breathe slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Keep moving. Don't think about the tons of stone overhead. Don't think about getting stuck. Don't think about dying alone in the dark. He thought about Talisa instead, about the way she'd looked at him in the firelight, about the kiss she'd given him before the firefight, about her voice when she said she didn't want a chance without him. He thought about Mira, who'd called him Pa and meant it. He thought about the family they'd become through blood and fire and loss. That's what got him through the narrowest section, the place where he had to exhale completely to fit through, where his ribs scraped against rock and panic clawed at his throat like a living thing. He thought about them, waiting for him, and kept moving. The passage began to widen. Light increased. Dawson stumbled forward, his shirt torn, his hands bleeding from scraping against stone, but alive. Alive, and still moving. He emerged into a small cavern, lit by shafts of sunlight from cracks in the ceiling. The walls were covered in petroglyphs, ancient drawings of hunts and ceremonies, of spirits and stories that predated the arrival of white men by centuries. In the center of the space, a pool of clear water reflected the light, and beside it, impossibly, grew a small garden of native plants that shouldn't exist in this dry place. This was the sacred ground. Dawson understood now. This was where Apache people came to commune with their ancestors, where the spirits of the dead were said to linger. He'd been tested not by the warriors, but by the canyon itself, tested to see if he had the strength and the will to reach this place. He'd made it. That had to count for something. Dawson knelt by the pool and drank deeply, the water cold and sweet. Then he closed his eyes and did something he hadn't done since Margaret's funeral. He prayed. Not to the Christian God he'd been raised with, but to whatever spirits inhabited this place. He prayed for Talisa and Mira, for Rafe's spirit, wherever it had gone. For Margaret, who he hoped would understand why he'd chosen to live again. For himself, and for the courage to keep moving forward even when the path ahead was dark and narrow and terrifying. When he opened his eyes, he could have sworn he saw something move in the shadows. a figure, watching. But when he looked directly at it, there was nothing. The passage on the far side of the cavern was wider, easier to navigate. Dawson walked through it quickly, eager to reach the other side, to see Talisa's face when he emerged alive. The canyon opened up gradually, light increasing with each step, until finally he stumbled out into brilliant sunshine. The Apache warriors were waiting. Talisa stood among them, her face streaked with tears. When she saw him, she broke from the group and ran, crashing into him with enough force to stagger them both. "You came back," she said against his chest. "You came back." "Told you I would." She pulled back enough to look at him, her hands framing his face. "You are bleeding. Canyon's rougher than it looks. You are also very stupid." "Been called that a few times lately." Then she kissed him, properly this time, with witnesses and sunlight and no ambiguity about what it meant. Dawson kissed her back, tasting salt from her tears and something else. Relief, maybe, or hope, or the beginning of something that neither of them had planned but both desperately needed. When they finally broke apart, the gray-haired warrior was watching them with an expression that might have been approval. "You passed test," he said. "Ancestors accept you. Very few white men strong enough for sacred path. You are strong." He handed back Dawson's rifle. "You keep women safe?" "With my life." "Good. You need new name. Dawson, this is white man name. I give you Dashijon, means strong heart. You accept?" Dawson looked at Talisa, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I accept." "Then you welcome. You stay with us until you are ready to cross border. We feed you, protect you. Soldiers do not come to our camps." It was more than Dawson had hoped for. "Thank you." The warrior waved this away. "You earn it. Now come. We have food, medicine for wounds, and stories. We want to hear how white man learns to love Apache woman enough to die for her." They followed the warriors through passages that would have been invisible if you didn't know they were there, emerging into a valley hidden so completely between rock formations that it might as well have been another world. A camp sprawled across the valley floor, wickiups made of branches and hide, cook fires sending smoke into the clear air, children playing under the watchful eyes of women and elders. It was a community, a real one, not just people surviving together, but living, building, maintaining traditions in the face of everything that threatened to destroy them. The warriors brought them to a large wickiup near the center of camp. Inside, an old woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing looked Dawson up and down. "You are the white man who passed the sacred way," she said in perfect English. "Yes, ma'am." "Do not ma'am me. I am not white." But her eyes crinkled with what might have been amusement. "I am Nahilze. I am medicine woman. You have wound inside, yes? Not healing proper. I fix. You sit." Dawson sat. Over the next hour, Nahilze cleaned and rebandaged his bullet wound with a combination of herbs and techniques that made Ellis's military medicine look primitive. She also treated the cuts and scrapes from the canyon, applying a paste that stung viciously but seemed to immediately reduce swelling. While she worked, Talisa sat beside him, holding his hand. Mira had been taken by some of the other children, who'd surrounded her with the instant acceptance that only kids could manage. Through the wickiup's opening, Dawson could see her laughing, actually laughing for the first time since Rafe's death. "Your woman," Nahilze said, without looking up from her work. "She has suffered much." "Yes." "Her baby. He is buried near the cottonwood tree, 2 days north." Dawson's head snapped up. "How did you—" "I know many things. The earth tells me. The wind. The spirits." She tied off the bandage with practiced hands. "The baby's spirit is at peace. He did not suffer at the end. He simply went to sleep and did not wake. This is a mercy." "I don't know if Talisa sees it that way." "She will. In time." Nahilze finally looked at him directly. "You love her?" It wasn't a question, but Dawson answered anyway. "Yes. This is good. She needs love. She needs to be seen not as widow, not as burden, but as woman, with heart still beating." The old medicine woman gathered her supplies. "You will stay here 7 days. Rest, heal, prepare. Then I will show you path to Mexico that soldiers do not watch. From there, you go to settlement near Llanos. Mexican families there, they help Apache people. They will help you. Why are you doing this? Helping us? Nahilze smiled, showing gaps where teeth had been. Because you passed sacred way. Because ancestors spoke to me in dreams, said white man with strong heart coming, bringing Apache woman home to safety. Because sometimes, when world is dark, we must be the light. She patted his shoulder. Now rest. Tonight, we feast. Tomorrow, we plan. 7 days. Dawson had never imagined such a gift. 7 days to heal, to rest, to simply exist without looking over his shoulder for soldiers or bounty hunters. 7 days with Talisa and Mira in a place where they were welcome instead of hunted. That night, the camp gathered around a central fire. There was food, more food than Dawson had seen in weeks, and music, drums and rattles creating rhythms that spoke of earth and sky and the space between. Children danced. Adults told stories in Apache that Dawson couldn't understand but could feel in his bones. Talisa sat beside him, Mira on her other side, and for the first time since they'd left Wyoming, Dawson saw peace on her face. Not happiness, not yet. The wound of losing Rafe was too fresh. But peace, the knowledge that for this moment, in this place, they were safe. The gray-haired warrior, whose name, Dawson learned, was Cochise, though he was no relation to the famous chief, sat across the fire and raised a cup of something that smelled potent. "Tudashijon," he called out, white man with strong heart who walked sacred way, and to his woman, widow of great chief, mother of 2 peoples, may their path be blessed. The camp echoed the toast, dozens of voices rising into the night. Dawson felt Talisa's hand find his in the darkness. He squeezed it, and she squeezed back, and in that simple exchange was everything they'd been through and everything that lay ahead. The next morning, Dawson woke to find Mira sitting outside the wickiup they'd been given, staring at the sunrise. He lowered himself beside her with a grunt. His side still hurt, though Nahilze's medicine had helped considerably. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "I slept, but I had dreams." Mira didn't look at him. About Rafe. About the snow. About all of it. Good dreams or bad? Both. In the dream, he was alive again. He was older, maybe 5 or 6, and he was running through a field of flowers. He was laughing. She wiped at her eyes. When I woke up, I remembered he's dead. That he'll never be 5 or 6. That he's in the ground. Dawson put his arm around her small shoulders. "I'm sorry, little one. I'm so damn sorry. Mama says his spirit is at peace, that he's with the ancestors now. Do you believe that?" Did he? Dawson thought about Margaret, about whether he believed she was somewhere watching him, or if death was just the end of everything. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I think if there's any justice in the universe, people we lose don't just disappear. They have to go somewhere. And if that somewhere is with ancestors and spirits and all the people who came before, then yeah. I think Rafe's okay." Mira leaned against him. "I miss him. Even though he couldn't talk or walk or do anything yet, I miss him." "That's because he was your brother. That doesn't stop just because he's gone." They sat in silence, watching the sun climb higher, painting the valley gold and orange and red. Other people began stirring, starting fires, beginning the day's work. Life continued as it always did, indifferent to grief. After a while, Mira said, "Are you going to marry my mother?" The question caught Dawson completely off guard. We haven't really discussed." "You should. She loves you, I can tell. And you love her, so you should marry her." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because," Dawson struggled for words, "because I was married before. Because your mother was married before. Because we're from different worlds, different peoples. Because you're scared," Mira said, with the brutal honesty of children. She was right. He was terrified. Not of Talisa, but of what loving her meant. It meant letting go of Margaret completely, accepting that his old life was gone and couldn't be reclaimed. It meant building something new on ground that had barely stopped shaking from everything they'd survived. "Yeah," he admitted. "I'm scared." "Mama's scared too." But she loves you anyway. Mira looked up at him. My real father, I barely remember him. He died when I was very young. But you've been more of a father to me in these weeks than anyone since he died. You make Mama smile. You keep us safe. You walked through the sacred canyon for us. She paused. So I think you should marry her. Make it official. Make us a real family. Before Dawson could respond, Talisa emerged from the wickiup, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She saw them sitting together and smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. What are you two conspiring about so early? She asked. Nothing, Mira said innocently, just talking about the sunrise. She scampered off, leaving Dawson alone with Talisa. The morning light caught in her hair, turning it bronze and gold, and Dawson was struck by how beautiful she was. Not in the delicate porcelain way that Margaret had been beautiful, but in a fierce, enduring way that spoke of survival and strength. You're staring, Talisa said. Sorry. Do not apologize. She sat beside him. I do not mind being seen. They watched the camp come alive around them, and Dawson wondered if Mira was right. If maybe the scariest thing was also the right thing. If maybe building something new didn't mean betraying what came before, but honoring it by choosing to live again. The days passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Dawson's wound continued to heal under Nahilze's care. Mira thrived among the other children, her Apache improving rapidly as she relearned the language she'd been born into. Talisa helped the women with daily work, slowly reconnecting with traditions she'd been forced to abandon. And Dawson learned. He learned Apache words and customs, learned to navigate the complex web of relationships that held the community together, learned that these people he'd been taught to fear were just people, trying to survive, trying to maintain their way of life in the face of overwhelming pressure to disappear. On the fifth night, Cochise invited Dawson to sit with the elder warriors around their fire. They passed a pipe and shared stories, and Dawson found himself telling them about Wyoming, about his ranch, about the choice he'd made to give it all up. You miss your home? One warrior asked. Sometimes, but it stopped being home when I stopped living there. Place is just place. Home is people. The warriors nodded, understanding this truth in their bones. They'd been driven from their lands repeatedly, forced to remake home over and over, and yet they persisted. You worry about soldiers still? Cochise asked. Every day? This is smart, but here you are protected. And when you cross to Mexico, soldiers cannot follow. Mexican government, they do not care about American bounties. What about after that? After we reach the settlement? Cochise puffed on the pipe thoughtfully. After? You live, you build new life, you raise child who is not yours by blood, but is yours by choice. You love woman who chose you as you chose her. He passed the pipe to Dawson. You do what all people do. You survive until surviving becomes living. Then you live until dying. This is the way. It sounded so simple when he put it like that. On the seventh morning, Nahilze woke Dawson before dawn. Come, she said. I show you path to Mexico. She led him up a narrow trail to a high point that overlooked the valley. From here, Dawson could see the land stretching south, rolling hills, scattered mesas, and in the far distance, a line of mountains that marked the border. See there? Nahilze pointed. Canyon with 3 fingers. You go through middle finger. 2 days' ride. At end, small creek. Follow it west. Another day, you reach Mexican settlement. Ask for Javier Mendoza. Tell him Nahilze sent you. He will help. How will I repay all this kindness? By living, by protecting your family, by remembering that Apache people showed you mercy when you needed it most. She gripped his arm. And maybe, when you are old and safe, you tell stories. You tell white people that we are human, like them, that we love, we suffer, we want only to live in peace. Maybe then things change. Dawson promised he would. That afternoon, they prepared to leave. The camp gave them supplies, dried meat, water skins, blankets that had been woven with patterns that told stories. Children brought gifts for Mira, small things, beaded bracelets, and carved toys. The women embraced Talisa, speaking to her in rapid Apache that made her cry. As they mounted their horses, Cochise approached one final time. "You are Apache now," he told Dawson. "Dashijon, strong heart. You walk between two worlds. This is difficult path, but important one. You remember this." "I will." They rode out as the sun began to set, following the trail Nahilze had shown them. At the valley's edge, Dawson turned back to look at the camp one last time. Fires were being lit. Children were playing. Life continued in this hidden place, protected by rock and tradition and the sheer stubbornness of a people who refused to disappear. Then they were through the passage, riding south into the gathering darkness, and the camp vanished as completely as if it had never existed. The journey to the border took 3 days instead of 2. They traveled carefully, avoiding any signs of patrols or settlements. On the morning of the 4th day, they crossed an unmarked line in the earth and found themselves in Mexico. No fanfare, no border checkpoint, just a gradual shift in the land and the knowledge that American law no longer applied. "We made it," Mira said, her voice filled with wonder. "We're safe." "Not yet," Dawson said, "but we're closer." They reached the settlement near Janos by midday. It was small, maybe 20 buildings clustered around a well, with fields stretching out in all directions. Mexican families worked the land, their children playing in irrigation ditches, their voices carrying on the warm air. Dawson asked for Javier Mendoza and was directed to a large adobe house near the center of town. The man who answered the door was perhaps 60, with weathered skin and eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised by anything. "Nahilze sent you," he asked after Dawson explained. "Yes, sir." Mendoza looked at Talisa and Mira, then back at Dawson. "You are the white man who travels with Apache family. I have heard of you. Come inside." The house was cool and dark, a relief after days in the sun. Mendoza's wife brought water and food while he listened to their story. When Dawson finished, the old man was quiet for a long time. "This settlement," he finally said, "we take in many people, Apache, Mexican, even white Americans running from their pasts. We do not ask questions. We do not cooperate with authorities on either side of the border. You can stay here, work the land, build a life, be safe." "Just like that?" Dawson couldn't quite believe it. "Just like that?" Mendoza smiled. "Life does not have to be complicated. Sometimes it is simply about choosing kindness over violence, acceptance over judgment. You will stay, yes?" Dawson looked at Talisa. She looked back at him, and in her eyes he saw the question that had been building between them for weeks. "Can I have a moment with Talisa?" Dawson asked. "To discuss?" Mendoza nodded, gesturing to a small courtyard behind the house. Outside, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at, Dawson took Talisa's hands in his. "We made it," he said. "Against all odds, we actually made it." "We did. So now we have to decide what comes next, where we go from here." Talisa squeezed his hands. "I know where I want to go, but I need to know where you want to go, Dawson Kincaid. Or should I say Dashijon? I want—" He took a breath. "I want to stop running. I want to build something that lasts. I want to watch Mira grow up without fear. I want—" He paused. "I want to spend whatever time I have left making you happy. If you'll let me." Tears spilled down Talisa's cheeks. "You make me happy already. You make me feel human again, not just a widow or a burden or something to be hunted. You make me feel like I deserve to live." "You do deserve it. You deserve everything." "Then give me this," she said. "Give me tomorrow and the day after and all the days until there are no more days. Give me a home and a life and the courage to keep choosing joy even when grief comes. Give me yourself, all of yourself, not just the pieces you think are acceptable." Dawson pulled her close, feeling her heart beat against his chest. "I can do that. I think I've been doing that since the night you collapsed in my barn." "Then we stay?" "We stay." They kissed, sealing the promise in the warmth of Mexican sunshine, with the sound of children's laughter drifting over adobe walls and the knowledge that the running was finally over. When they returned inside, Mira was already making friends with Mendoza's grandchildren. She looked up as they entered and grinned, seeing something in their faces that made her expression brighten. "We're staying?" she asked. "We're staying," Dawson confirmed. The girl whooped and returned to her new friends, already chattering in a mixture of Spanish and Apache that somehow everyone understood. Mendoza showed them to a small house on the edge of the settlement, just 2 rooms and a covered porch, but it was clean and dry and theirs. As the sun set that evening, Dawson stood on the porch, watching the sky turn impossible shades of orange and purple. Talisa joined him, leaning against his shoulder. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I started this journey as a dead man, that somewhere along the way I came back to life, and that I have you to thank for that. I could say the same about you. Then we saved each other." "Yes." She turned to face him. "Now we live for each other, and for Mira, and for the memory of those we lost. We live because they cannot, and we make it count." Inside they could hear Mira singing, an Apache lullaby mixed with a Spanish folk song, the melodies tangling together in a way that shouldn't work but somehow did. Dawson wrapped his arms around Talisa and held her as darkness fell, feeling the warmth of her body and the steady beat of her heart and the quiet certainty that he was finally, after 3 years of death, home. The first month in the settlement passed like water through cupped hands, precious, fleeting, and somehow more real than anything Dawson had experienced in years. He took a new name, as Mendoza suggested. Not completely new. He kept Dawson as his given name, but became Mateo for daily use, a bridge between the man he'd been and the man he was becoming. Mateo Kingsley had a certain ring to it, and the surname was close enough to Kincaid that he could remember who he'd been without being trapped by it. Talisa kept her name but added his to it in the Mexican tradition, becoming Talisa de Kingsley. They didn't marry immediately, there were no priests in the settlement, and the nearest church was a 3-day ride through territory neither of them wanted to revisit. Instead, they made their vows to each other one evening under the stars, with Mira as their witness and Mendoza presiding over a ceremony that blended Apache tradition with Mexican custom and created something entirely their own. "I promise to see you," Dawson said, holding both her hands. "Not as widow, not as Apache, not as anything except the woman you are. I promise to stand with you when the world pushes back. I promise to love you not despite our differences, but because of them. I promise to be the family you chose when your own people rejected you." Talisa's voice was steady, despite the tears on her cheeks. "I promise to see you, not as soldier, not as white man, not as the ghost you were when we met. I promise to remind you that you deserve joy. I promise to build a life with you that honors those we've lost while celebrating that we survived. I promise to be the home you gave up everything to find." Mendoza pronounced them married in the eyes of God and community, and that was enough, more than enough. The house Mendoza provided sat on 5 acres that had been worked before, but left fallow for 2 seasons. The soil was good once you irrigated it properly, and Dawson threw himself into the work with an intensity that surprised even him. He'd ranched in Wyoming, but this was different. This was growing things, instead of just managing them, coaxing life from earth that wanted to give it if you knew how to ask. Talisa worked beside him, her hands as calloused as his by the end of each day. She planted corn using techniques her grandmother had taught her, mixing it with beans and squash in a method that white farmers would have called primitive, but which produced yields that made those same farmers jealous. She also started teaching, first just Mira, helping her daughter relearn reading and writing in Spanish and English, then other children in the settlement whose parents wanted them educated but had no formal schooling themselves. Mira flourished. The haunted look faded from her eyes, replaced by something that looked like actual childhood. She played with other children without constantly glancing over her shoulder. She laughed without it sounding like she'd forgotten how. She called Dawson Pa without the performance, just natural and easy, like it had always been that way. 3 months into their new life, on a morning when the heat already pressed down like a weight and the sky stretched blue and empty overhead, Dawson was working in the cornfield when he heard horses approaching. His hand went instinctively to the rifle he now kept within reach at all times, but he forced himself to straighten slowly, to look casual even as his heart rate spiked. 2 riders appeared on the road, Mexican men, dressed for travel, their horses tired. They stopped at the edge of the property, and one raised his hand in greeting. "Senor Kingsley?" the man called out. "That's me?" Dawson kept his distance. Something I can help you with? Perhaps. My name is Eduardo Flores. This is my brother, Ramon. We've ridden from Llanos with news. What kind of news? Eduardo dismounted, moving slowly to show he meant no threat. May we speak in shade? It is a long story, and the sun is not kind. Dawson gestured toward the house, and they walked together in silence. Talisa emerged as they approached, wiping flour from her hands, her eyes immediately assessing the strangers for danger. Dawson gave her a small nod. Not a threat, but something important, and she brought water for their guests before settling beside him on the porch. Eduardo drank deeply, then set down his cup. I am told you are the man who crossed 300 miles with Apache woman and child, the man the American Army seeks for harboring fugitives. Every muscle in Dawson's body tensed. Who told you that? Many people. Your story has traveled far. There are those who admire what you did, and those who would profit from your capture. Eduardo held up a hand. I am not the latter. I come with warning and with news that may change your situation. I'm listening. 3 weeks ago, a man arrived in Llanos. American, former soldier, looking for you and your wife. He asked many questions, offered much money for information. Eduardo paused. This man, he was not like the bounty hunters. He wore no uniform but carried himself like officer. He said his name was Hale. The name hit Dawson like a fist. Sergeant Hale, the man who'd searched his ranch, who'd sworn to see him hang, who'd known from the beginning that Dawson was hiding Talisa. What did you tell him? Dawson asked, his voice carefully neutral. Nothing. We told him we had not seen any Americans, but Llanos is not small, and tongues wag when money appears. Someone will tell him eventually. Someone will point him toward this settlement. Eduardo leaned forward. He is not giving up, Senor Kingsley. He has made this personal, and I think you know why. Dawson did know. He'd humiliated Hale, made him look foolish, escaped from under his nose with the very fugitive he'd sworn to capture. For a man like Hale, that was worse than any bullet wound. How long before he finds us? A week, maybe 2 if he is cautious. But he will come. Silence fell. Mira appeared in the doorway, sensing the tension, and Talisa pulled her close without taking her eyes off Eduardo. Ramon, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. There is more. The news from America is not all bad. The man Hale claims your wife killed, Corporal Hayes, they found him alive. Dawson's head snapped up. What? Alive. In a mining camp in Montana Territory. He deserted his post, took money from the payroll, disappeared. The Army kept it quiet because they were embarrassed. But recently he was arrested for another crime, and the truth came out. Ramon smiled slightly. The wanted poster for your wife was based on a lie. She killed no one. The charges against her are false. Then she's not a fugitive? Technically, no. The Army has quietly withdrawn the warrant, but they will not announce this publicly. Too much embarrassment. And it does not change that you harbored her, which is still a crime in their eyes. Especially with Sergeant Hale, who has convinced his superiors that you are dangerous, that you have gone native and pose a threat to American interests. So even though she's innocent, we're still hunted. By Hale, yes. He has requested permission to cross into Mexico to apprehend you. The American government is unlikely to grant this officially, but Hale is resourceful. He may come anyway, with or without permission. Talisa's hand found Dawson's. Then we run again. We find another place, farther south, deeper into Mexico, where... No, Dawson's voice was firm. No more running. We've run far enough. If Hale wants me, he can come get me. But he'll do it on ground I choose, with rules I set. Eduardo studied him. You're talking about a fight. I'm talking about ending this, one way or another. Mateo. Talisa used his new name like a prayer. You cannot fight the American Army alone. I'm not alone. I've got you. I've got this community. I've got people who understand what it means to stand against authority that thinks it owns you. He turned to Eduardo. Why did you ride all this way to warn me? You don't know me. You owe me nothing. Because my sister married Apache man 30 years ago. Mexican family disowned her. White authorities harassed her. She and her husband fled to mountains and died there. frozen, because no one would give them shelter. Eduardo's voice was heavy with old grief. I could not save my sister, but maybe I can help save you. Maybe that will balance the scales in some small way. Then help me do this right. Help me make sure Talisa and Mira stay safe no matter what happens. Can you do that? What are you planning? Dawson was quiet for a moment, the plan forming even as he spoke it. I'm planning to meet Hale on my terms. To force a confrontation where he can't just arrest me and drag me back in chains. To make him either accept that Talisa's innocent or prove that he's the one breaking laws by crossing borders without authority. He paused. And if it comes down to it, to make sure that if I fall, he falls with me. That is not a plan, Talisa said. That is suicide. Maybe. But it's better than waiting for him to show up here, in this place we've built, and destroy it. Better than spending the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. She stared at him, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes. The urge to protect him fighting against the knowledge that he was right. Finally, she said, If you do this, I go with you. Absolutely not. You do not get to decide. We are married now. We face things together, which is exactly why you need to stay here. Mira needs her mother. The settlement needs its teacher, and I need to know that if everything goes wrong, you'll be safe. That something good will survive even if I don't. Mateo, please. He cupped her face in his hands. Please let me do this. Let me protect you the way you protected me when you came back in that canyon. Let me be the one who takes the risk this time. Her tears came then, hot and bitter. I just found you. I'm not ready to lose you. You won't lose me. I promise. It was a promise he had no right to make, but he made it anyway. Over the next week, Dawson prepared. Eduardo and Ramon helped spread word through the settlement that trouble was coming, and the response surprised him. Men he barely knew offered to stand with him. Women brought food and medicine. Even the children contributed, bringing small things, lucky stones, woven bracelets, prayers written on scraps of paper. This is what community means, Mendoza told him one evening. You defended one of us. We defend you. This is how we survive when the world wants us scattered. Dawson chose the location carefully. A box canyon 5 miles north of the settlement, with only one entrance and high walls that would make it difficult for anyone to bring superior numbers to bear. He cached supplies there, water, ammunition, medical supplies. He studied the terrain until he could navigate it blind, and he waited. Hale arrived on the 9th day. Dawson was in the field when Mira came running, her face pale. Pa, Mama says soldiers are coming. He dropped his hoe and ran. From the porch, he could see them. A line of riders on the northern horizon, maybe 10 in total. Too many for a simple arrest. This was a show of force. Get everyone inside, he told Talisa. Lock the doors. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Mateo, do it, please. He kissed her once, hard and fast, then mounted his horse and rode out to meet them. He intercepted them a quarter-mile from the settlement, on open ground where any violence would be visible to witnesses. Hale rode at the head of the group, and Dawson noted with grim satisfaction that only 3 of the men wore American uniforms. The others were hired guns, bounty hunters, the kind of men who didn't care about jurisdiction or law. Kincaid, Hale called out as they approached, or should I say Kingsley? Nice try with the new name, but you're not hard to track when you don't understand how gossip works. I didn't figure I was hiding. Hard to hide when you're planting corn in full view of the road. Then you're either very stupid or very confident. Hale reined in his horse, his hand resting casually on his pistol. I'm here to take you back, you and that Apache woman. Face charges for harboring a fugitive and aiding in the escape of a wanted criminal. Except she's not wanted anymore. Corporal Hayes is alive. The army knows it. You know it. Hale's expression didn't change. I know no such thing. Then you're a liar as well as a fool. Hayes was found in Montana, alive and guilty of desertion and theft. The warrant for Talisa was withdrawn weeks ago, which means you have no legal authority to be here, no jurisdiction in Mexico, and no right to threaten my family. Your family, Hale spat the words like they tasted bad. You're a disgrace, Kincaid. You turned your back on your own kind for some Apache squaw who probably killed your wife's friends. You've gone native, and that makes you worse than they are. Dawson felt his control slip slightly. You don't know a damn thing about her. Or me. or what we've survived. I know you're a traitor, and I know I'm taking you back one way or another. Not today. Dawson's voice was steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. You want me fine, but we do this proper. Just you and me. No guns, no hired thugs, no innocent people caught in the crossfire. We settle this like men, and whatever happens, the other side accepts it and walks away. Hale laughed, though there was no humor in it. You think I'm going to fight you fair? You think I came all this way to give you a sporting chance? I think you came all this way because your pride's wounded and you can't accept that I outsmarted you. But I'm giving you an out. Beat me in fair combat, prove you're the better man, and I'll come back with you willingly. My wife and daughter stay here, safe and free, but you get to bring me in, save face, claim victory. And if you win, then you ride away and never come back. You tell your superiors that you searched but found nothing. You let me live my life in peace. Hale considered this. Dawson could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The weight of ego versus pragmatism, pride versus common sense. Finally, Hale dismounted. Fine, but not here. I'm not stupid enough to fight in front of witnesses who are on your side. There's a canyon about 5 miles north. We go there. Just the two of us. The others wait here. It was the canyon Dawson had prepared. Perfect. Agreed. They rode north in silence, leaving the others behind with instructions to wait 2 hours. If neither man returned by then, they could assume the worst and act accordingly. It was a gamble for both of them, trusting that their respective groups would honor the agreement. The canyon looked different in afternoon light, harsher, more hostile. Dawson dismounted at the entrance and pulled his rifle from its scabbard. Hale did the same. They faced each other across 30 feet of empty ground. I want you to know, Hale said, this isn't personal. It's about principle, about maintaining order, about not letting people like you decide they're above the law. It's always personal, Dawson replied. You're not doing this for principle. You're doing it because I made you look bad, because I chose an Apache woman over your approval, because I remind you that the law you worship is often just another word for cruelty dressed up nice. You're a fool, Kincaid. Been called that before? Hale raised his rifle. What happened next unfolded in the space between heartbeats. Dawson dove left as Hale fired, the bullet kicking up dust where he'd been standing. He rolled, came up shooting, his first round catching Hale in the shoulder and spinning him around. Hale's second shot went wide, ricocheting off rock with a whine like an angry wasp. They circled each other, both wounded now. Dawson's old bullet wound had reopened with the diving roll, blood soaking through his shirt. They fired simultaneously. Dawson's shot took Hale in the leg. Hale's shot grazed Dawson's ribs, burning like liquid fire. Hale went down hard, his rifle clattering away. Dawson approached carefully, his own weapon aimed at the sergeant's chest. You lost, Dawson said. Accept it. Hale's hand shot out, grabbing a rock, swinging it at Dawson's knee. Dawson stumbled, and Hale lunged for his fallen rifle. They grappled, strength against strength, neither willing to yield. The rifle went off between them, the shot deafening in the confined space. For a moment, neither moved. Then Hale slumped backward, blood blooming across his uniform jacket. The bullet had caught him in the chest, probably from his own rifle, fired during the struggle. Dawson knelt beside him, pressing his hand to the wound, trying to stop the bleeding even though he knew it was futile. You won, Hale whispered, his voice wet with blood. You actually won. No, Dawson said. We both lost. You lost your life. I lost, I don't even know what. Maybe just more time with my family. She better be worth it, that Apache woman. She better be worth all this. She is. They both are. Hale coughed, red bubbles at his lips. Tell my men it was a fair fight, that you gave me a chance. They'll respect that. I will. And Kincaid? For what it's worth. Hale's breathing grew shallower. You were a better man than I gave you credit for. Foolish, but brave. That counts for something. Then he was gone, his eyes going distant, his body going slack. Dawson sat back on his heels, exhausted and hurting and sick with what he'd just done. He'd killed before, in the war, in self-defense, in that desperate fight with the bounty hunters. But this felt different. This felt like crossing a line he couldn't uncross. He buried Hale in the canyon, marking the grave with stones. It wasn't much, but it was what he could do. Then he rode back to where the others waited. Hale's men saw his face and knew without being told. One of the bounty hunters, a scarred man with dead eyes, reached for his pistol, but one of the soldiers stopped him. "How'd it go?" the soldier asked. "Fair fight. He died well." "His orders for us?" "Head back. Report that you searched but found no sign of fugitives, that the trail went cold." The soldier studied Dawson for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right. But Kincaid, if we ever see you north of the border again, this amnesty ends. Understood?" "Understood." They rode away, taking the bounty hunters with them, and Dawson was left alone with his horse and the weight of what he'd done. He made it back to the settlement by nightfall. Talisa was waiting on the porch, and the moment she saw him, bloodied and stumbling, she ran to him. "Is it over?" she asked. "It's over." She helped him inside, where Nahilze, who'd arrived from the Apache camp 2 days earlier, claiming the spirits told her she'd be needed, cleaned and bandaged his wounds. "You killed him," the medicine woman said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "And you feel guilt?" "Yes." "This is good. Men who kill without guilt become monsters." She tied off the bandage. "But you must not carry this forever. He chose to follow you. He chose to fight. You simply chose to survive. The difference matters." Over the following weeks, Dawson healed. The physical wounds closed first, then the psychological ones, though those took longer and left deeper scars. He had nightmares about the fight, about the look in Hale's eyes as he died. Talisa held him through them, reminding him that he was still human, still capable of feeling, still worthy of the life they were building. Mendoza brought official word a month later. The American Army had closed the case on the fugitive Apache woman and her accomplice. Sergeant Hale had been listed as killed in action during a border patrol. No mention of Dawson or Talisa. No outstanding warrants. It was over, for real this time. "You are free," Mendoza told them. "Truly free. No more looking over your shoulder. No more wondering when they will come." That night, Dawson stood on the porch of their small house, watching the sunset paint the sky impossible colors. The fields were growing well, corn already knee-high, beans twining up the stalks, squash spreading broad leaves that caught the golden light. It looked like hope, green and growing, reaching toward the sun. Talisa joined him, sliding under his arm in that way she had, fitting against him like she'd been designed for that exact space. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I spent 3 years being dead, and now I've spent 4 months learning to live again, and that I have you to thank for that. We saved each other, remember?" "I remember." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their daughter play with other children in the dirt road, her laughter carrying on the warm evening air. She was teaching them a game, half Apache, half something she'd invented, and they were all shrieking with delight. "I've been thinking," Talisa said carefully, "about Rafe, about how we left him in that grave so far away. You want to go back for him?" "No, I want to plant a tree here, for him, so we have a place to remember. So his spirit knows where to find us when we speak his name." She touched her stomach. "And I want to tell you something I learned yesterday from Nahilze." Dawson turned to look at her. "What?" "I am pregnant." The words hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying and wonderful. "Are you sure?" "Yes. 2 months, maybe 3. The baby will come in the spring." Dawson felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking, but opening, making room for more joy than he'd thought he could hold. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He pulled her close, feeling her heart beat against his. Terrified, amazed, grateful. But yes, somewhere in all of that, happy. "Good, because I'm also terrified." She laughed, the sound bubbling up like water from a spring. "But I'm ready to try again. To bring new life into this world we've built. To show them that love can survive even when everything else burns." They planted the tree the next week, a young cottonwood that would grow tall and strong, its roots digging deep into Mexican soil. Mira helped, patting dirt around the base, while Talisa sang the Apache songs for remembering. They didn't mark it with Rafe's name. That would invite questions they didn't want to answer, but they knew, and knowing was enough. Time moved differently after that. Not the desperate flight they'd known for so long, but the steady rhythm of seasons and growth. Winter came, mild by Wyoming standards, but cold enough to remind them where they'd been. Spring brought new life, crops pushing through earth, animals bearing young, and on a warm April morning, the first cries of a baby boy. They named him Raphael Dawson Kingsley, Raphael for the brother he'd never meet, Dawson for the name his father had given up to keep them safe, Kingsley for the new life they'd built from ashes. He was healthy and loud and hungry, with his mother's copper skin and his father's stubborn jaw. Mira was enchanted, playing the role of protective older sister with a fierceness that made Dawson's throat tight every time he saw it. "He will not die like Rafe," she declared on the day they brought him home. "I will make sure." "I know you will," Talisa told her. "You are the best big sister he could have." The settlement celebrated the birth the way they celebrated everything, with food and music and the kind of joy that came from surviving long enough to see tomorrow. Nahilzai blessed the baby in Apache. Father Marcos, who traveled through twice a year from Chihuahua, blessed him in Latin. Mendoza blessed him in Spanish. Raphael was claimed by 3 cultures before he was a week old, and Dawson thought that was exactly right. Let the boy be all of them. Let him be living proof that walls between peoples were illusions that could be torn down. On Raphael's first birthday, Dawson built a larger house, still simple, 4 rooms instead of 2, a real porch with chairs for sitting, a separate structure for storage, but it was theirs. He carved their names into the lintel above the door: Mateo, Talisa, Mira, Raphael. A family. Complete. Talisa's school grew. She taught 20 children now, ranging from toddlers learning their letters to teenagers studying mathematics and literature. She was fierce about education, believing it was the key to survival in a changing world. Dawson helped when he could, teaching practical skills, carpentry, animal husbandry, land management, while she taught everything else. The crops flourished. Dawson had a gift for reading the land, for knowing what would grow where, and their yields were consistently strong. They traded surplus for things they needed, building relationships with neighboring settlements, becoming part of the broader community. 2 years after Raphael's birth, Talisa came to him with another announcement. "I am pregnant again." This time Dawson didn't feel terror, just a quiet, steady joy that settled into his bones like warmth. "How do you feel about it?" "Happy? Tired already?" She laughed. "But happy. Our family keeps growing, and that is good. That is how we win against death, by choosing life over and over, by bringing children into the world who will carry our stories forward." Their daughter was born in the autumn, during harvest season when the air smelled of corn and earth and promise. They named her Margaret Rose. Margaret for the wife Dawson had loved and lost. Rose because Talisa said the baby's spirit felt like a flower opening to the sun. "You don't mind?" Dawson asked Talisa as she nursed the newborn. "Naming her after my first wife?" "Why would I mind? She was part of making you who you are. She taught you how to love before I did. We honor her by remembering." Talisa looked down at the baby. "And I think she would be happy to know you chose to live again, that you opened your heart when it would have been easier to keep it closed." Mira was 14 now, tall and serious and beautiful, in the way that made Dawson want to lock her in the house until she was 40. She spoke 3 languages fluently, could read better than most adults, and had recently announced her intention to become a teacher like her mother. "Someone has to keep educating people," she said with the absolute certainty of youth. "Someone has to make sure knowledge doesn't die just because governments try to erase us." One evening, 5 years after they'd arrived in the settlement, Dawson sat on the porch with a glass of tequila and watched his family. Talisa was teaching Raphael to read, her patience infinite as the boy struggled with words. Mira was walking with little Margaret on her hip, pointing at birds and naming them in all 3 languages. The cottonwood tree they'd planted for Rafe had grown tall. its leaves rustling in the evening breeze. This was what victory looked like, he realized. Not glory or recognition or great achievements marked in history books. Just a quiet evening in a house full of people you loved, doing ordinary things that felt miraculous because you'd nearly lost the chance to do them at all. "What are you thinking about?" Talisa asked, appearing beside him with her own glass. "That I'm 42 years old and I've lived 3 different lives. The soldier, the dead man, and this, whatever this is. This is peace, Matteo. This is what comes after war and running and loss. This is what we earn when we refuse to give up." "You think we've earned it?" "Yes. Every scar, every mile, every moment of terror. We earned this. And now we get to enjoy it for however long we have." They clinked glasses, drinking to survival and second chances and the stubborn resilience of hope. The years continued their steady march. Raphael grew into a boy who loved horses and stories in equal measure. Margaret became a tiny force of nature, fearless and curious, always climbing things she shouldn't and asking questions that had no easy answers. Mira prepared to attend university in Mexico City, a journey that terrified Dawson but that Talisa insisted was necessary. "Let her go," Talisa said. "Let her learn. Let her become who she is meant to be. We cannot keep her small just because we are afraid." So they let her go, this daughter who wasn't his by blood, but was his in every way that mattered. And when she wrote letters describing her classes, her friends, her growing understanding of the world, Dawson read them with pride that made his chest ache. On the 10th anniversary of their arrival in the settlement, Mendoza threw a celebration. The entire community gathered, more than 100 people now, the settlement having grown as word spread about a place where different peoples could coexist without violence or judgment. Speeches were made, stories were told. Children performed a play that was supposed to be about the history of the settlement, but mostly involved elaborate costumes and giggling. Dawson watched it all with a feeling he couldn't quite name, contentment maybe, or simply the absence of pain. That night, lying in bed with Talisa beside him and the sounds of sleeping children in nearby rooms, Dawson thought about the journey that had brought him here. The blizzard, the barn, the desperate flight across 300 miles of hostile territory, the graves they'd left behind, the battles they'd fought. It had been worth it. Every frozen step, every bullet wound, every moment of terror had been worth it to arrive here, in this moment, with these people. "I love you," he whispered to Talisa. She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting moonlight. "I love you. I have loved you since you chose to pull me from the snow instead of letting me die. I will love you until the day I join the ancestors." "That better be a long time from now." "It will be. We have earned our years, Matteo. Now we get to live them." And they did. Not forever. No one gets forever. But they lived long enough to see Raphael married, to hold grandchildren, to watch the settlement grow into a small town. They lived long enough to see Mira return from university and open a school of her own. They lived long enough to see Margaret become a healer, studying under Nahilze and then going beyond her teacher's knowledge. They lived long enough to matter. Dawson died first, at 71, of a heart that had carried him through more than any heart reasonably should. It gave out on a Tuesday morning while he was checking the irrigation ditches, and he fell softly into earth he'd spent 30 years coaxing into life. They buried him under the cottonwood tree, beside the space they'd always known was meant for Rafe, even though no body rested there. Talisa stood at the graveside without crying, because she'd long ago learned that tears were for goodbyes, and this wasn't goodbye. This was just one part of their journey ending while another continued. She lived 7 more years teaching until the day her own body decided it had given enough. She died in her sleep, surrounded by children and grandchildren, with Mira holding her hand and whispering Apache prayers for the journey ahead. They buried her beside Dawson, under that same cottonwood tree that had grown massive with the years, its roots tangling deep in soil fed by 2 rivers and 3 cultures. Mira lived to be 83. She never married, said she'd seen what real love looked like in her parents and wasn't willing to settle for less. Instead, she poured herself into education, into preserving Apache language and stories, into building bridges between peoples who'd been taught to hate each other. On the day she died, she requested that they bury her beside her mother and the man who'd chosen to be her father. As they lowered her into the earth, her students, and her students sang in 3 languages, their voices rising like smoke toward a sky that stretched blue and empty and infinite. The town continued. The houses Dawson had built still stood. The fields he'd planted still grew. The school Talisa had founded still taught children to read and think and question. The cottonwood tree still grew, its branches providing shade for generations who never knew the people buried beneath its roots but who benefited from the choices those people had made. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind moved through the leaves just right, you could hear something that sounded almost like voices. A man's laugh, a woman's song, a child's delighted shriek. Ghosts, perhaps. Or just memories of a family who'd survived when they should have died, who'd built something lasting from snow and bullets and the stubborn belief that love could outlive war. Their story didn't end with a dramatic flourish or a perfect bow. It ended the way all lives end, quietly, gradually, with the understanding that what mattered wasn't the length of the journey, but what you built along the way. They'd built a family. They'd built a home. They'd built proof that the walls between peoples were illusions that could be torn down if you had enough courage and compassion to try. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. And under a cottonwood tree in a settlement that had become a town that would someday become a city, 3 graves lay side by side, marked with simple stones that bore names in 3 languages and one truth that transcended all of them. Here lie people who chose love over hate, life over death, and hope over despair. Here lie people who lived.